Elden Ring has more buried lore, hidden contradictions, and quietly devastating secrets than almost any game ever made, and tonight we are going to go through all of it. Every mystery, every theory, every forgotten detail, in one long, calm, unhurried journey through the lands between. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. So I want to be upfront with you about what this video is and how it came together. I put this together because I kept running into the same problem with Elden Ring lore content. Most of it either goes too fast, jumps around too much, or treats the lore like it has one definitive answer. And the truth is, it does not. Elden Ring was designed by Hidetaka Miyazaki and written in collaboration with George R.R. Martin, and the way they built this world together means the lore is genuinely fragmented. Items contradict each other. Characters remember things differently. The timeline is broken on purpose. So what I chose to do with this video was slow everything way down, move through the world in a way that builds on itself, and present each mystery not as a solved puzzle, but as a story still being told. I also made the choice to exclude a lot of the really niche, item-specific deep dives that would only make sense to someone who has already read about the topic, and instead focused on the threads that connect the whole world together. Some things I reordered so that by the time we reach the bigger mysteries, you already have the context you need. Alright, let us begin. The world of Elden Ring is called the Lands Between. That name is not accidental. It refers to a place that sits between states of being, between life and death, between order and chaos, between the guidance of a higher power and the total absence of one. The Lands Between is a realm that has been shaped, reshaped, shattered, and partially rebuilt over thousands of years. And the thing holding it all together, or at least trying to, is the Elden Ring. The Elden Ring itself. The Elden Ring is not a physical ring in the way most people imagine it at first. It is more like a framework, a set of laws. It is the foundation of order in the Lands Between, and it is maintained by the Erd tree, the massive golden tree that towers over the entire continent and can be seen from anywhere in the world. The Elden Ring is made up of several great runes, each one representing a fundamental concept: life, death, order, chaos. The physical manifestation of the Elden Ring can be found inside the Erd tree itself, held by Queen Marika, the Eternal, who is both its vessel and its guardian. Before the Elden Ring existed, the Lands Between was governed by something called the Crucible. The Crucible is one of the most interesting and most overlooked concepts in the entire game. It refers to the primordial state of life before order was imposed. In that ancient time, creatures were not fixed in their forms. They were fluid. Things that would later become dragons could also share traits with things that would become humans. Tails, scales, wings, and branches could grow from any living thing because the boundaries between species had not yet been drawn. The Crucible was not chaotic in a violent sense. It was just unstructured. Everything was connected to everything else. This matters because the Elden Ring, when it was established, essentially ended the Crucible. It drew lines. It said this is a human, this is a dragon, this is a tree, and those things are separate. Order replaced fluidity. And while this brought stability to the Lands Between, it also severed a deep ancient connection that many creatures had to the world. The Crucible Knights, enemies you encounter throughout the game, are still connected to that primordial state. They bear aspects of the Crucible, meaning they have tails or fins or other ancient traits that have no place in the ordered world under the Erd tree. They are not monsters. They are remnants, living proof that the world was once something entirely different. The greater will and the outer gods. Now the Elden Ring did not just appear on its own. It was placed in the Lands Between by a force called the Greater Will. The Greater Will is an outer god, meaning it exists outside the physical world, somewhere beyond the stars. It is not present in any tangible way, that characters can interact with. It communicates through smaller entities called two fingers, which are exactly what they sound like. Strange ancient beings that resemble two enormous pale fingers, and they relay the will of the greater will to the people of the lands between. The greater will's primary goal seems to be the perpetuation of order. It wants the Elden Ring maintained. It wants the Erd tree to grow. It wants the cycle of grace and rebirth to continue. Why it wants this is never explicitly stated. One possible reading is that it simply views order as inherently good. Another reading, and a darker one, is that the greater will feeds on the stability of the lands between. In some way we do not fully understand. It is worth noting that the greater will does not seem particularly concerned with the suffering of individuals. It cares about the system, not the people inside it. The greater will is not the only outer god, however. This is crucial. There are several outer gods, and each one has its own agenda, its own chosen vessels, and its own relationship with the lands between. The game points toward at least 4 of them clearly, and possibly more in the background. There is the scarlet rot, which is associated with the goddess of rot and manifests through millennia. There is the frenzied flame, which seems to represent total entropy, the desire to burn away all distinction and merge everything back into undifferentiated chaos. There is the influence of the moon, which connects to Rani and the Karian royal family, and there are hints of other forces in the background, tied to things like the death root, the serpent of Volcano Manor, and possibly the formless mother mentioned in Mohg's lore. These outer gods are not allies. They are competing. Each one wants to shape the lands between according to its own vision, and the conflict between them is one of the deepest undercurrents running through the entire game. Most of the tragedy in Elden Ring comes from what happens when people become vessels for these competing forces, Marika and Radagon. Queen Marika, the Eternal, is the central figure of Elden Ring's history. She is the god of the lands between, the vessel of the greater will, and the one who holds the Elden Ring together. But Marika is also one of the most complicated and arguably most tragic characters in the game, because of what she eventually did and why. Marika was not always a god. She was originally a human, born among a group called the Numen, which are described as a people from outside the lands between. Exactly where the Numen came from is unclear. Some lore points toward the idea that they came from beyond the stars, which would make them the same kind of extra-dimensional presence as the outer gods themselves, though on a much smaller, more human scale. Marika rose to become the vessel of the greater will and was eventually granted immortality and godhood. She became the Elden Lord's consort, though that title belongs to her husband, and she became the eternal queen of the lands between. Now here is where it gets interesting. Marika had 2 husbands over the course of history. The first was Godfrey, the second was Radagon, and Radagon is not a separate person. Radagon of the Golden Order is Marika. They are the same being. This is confirmed in the game, though it is presented in a way that feels more like a revelation than an explanation, because there is no real explanation. The game does not tell you how one person can be 2 people. It simply shows you that they are. One possible reading is that Marika fractured herself deliberately, splitting off a male aspect, Radagon, in order to remarry and produce more demigod children after Godfrey was exiled. Another reading is that Marika and Radagon were always 2 aspects of one being, and that the split happened much earlier, possibly as a consequence of becoming the vessel for the greater will. What makes this even stranger is that Radagon and Marika did not always agree. There is lore suggesting that Marika and Radagon were in conflict with each other internally. Radagon was a devoted champion of the Golden Order, perhaps even more so than Marika herself. He tried to repair the Elden Ring after Marika shattered it. She broke it, and he tried to put it back together. That tension between the part of this single being that wanted to destroy the Order and the part that wanted to preserve it is one of the most haunting ideas in the entire game. Why did Marika shatter the Elden Ring? This is the question the whole game is built around, and the answer is not clean. The game offers several pieces of evidence and lets you assemble them into a theory. The most widely supported reading goes like this. Marika had a son named Godwyn the Golden. Godwyn was the firstborn of Marika and Godfrey, and by all accounts he was genuinely good. Not just powerful, but kind. He was admired even by his enemies. During a war with the ancient dragons, he personally made peace with them after defeating their champion, because he believed there was no reason for more killing. He was the kind of figure who seemed like he could have held the world together, and then he was murdered. Specifically, on the Night of Black Knives, a group of assassins used daggers imbued with the rune of death to kill Godwyn, but they did not kill him completely. What they did to Godwyn was worse than killing him. They killed his soul while leaving his body alive. Godwyn the Golden became the first of the dead who do not die, a body without a soul, continuing to grow and spread beneath the roots of the Erdtree in a grotesque mockery of life. His name for this state is the Prince of Death. Marika's response to this was to shatter the Elden Ring. She took it and broke it apart, sending its great runes scattering to her surviving children, the demigods. This act broke the world. It began what is known as the Shattering, a war between the demigods, fighting over the fragments of the Elden Ring, and it left the lands between in the damaged, half-ruined state that you explore as the player. Why Marika chose to do this is the mystery. One reading is grief. She lost her beloved son in the most horrifying way imaginable, and she broke the system that failed to protect him. Another reading is that it was deliberate sabotage of the greater will, that Marika had grown tired of being its vessel, tired of maintaining a cosmic order that asked her to sacrifice everything, and that shattering the Elden Ring was an act of rebellion. The lore around Ranni suggests this second reading has some truth to it. Marika may have known what Ranni was planning on the Night of Black Knives, the theft of the Rune of Death, and may have allowed it to happen as part of a larger plan to break free from the greater will's control. Either way or both ways, the shattering was the event that set everything in motion. The Tarnished, which is what you are as the player, were exiled from the lands between long before the shattering and have been called back by grace to repair the Elden Ring and become the new Elden Lord, Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. Before we go further into the demigods and the consequences of the shattering, it is worth spending time with Godfrey because he is one of the most quietly important figures in this whole story. Godfrey was a warrior, a great one. He led armies for Marika and helped establish the Golden Order's dominance over the lands between by defeating its enemies, including the giants, the dragons, and various other forces that resisted the Order. He was the first Elden Lord, which means he was the human king who stood beside Marika and gave her rule a mortal face and a martial force. But after Godfrey had defeated all of his enemies, Marika sent him away. She stripped him of his grace, which is the divine gift that connects people to the Erdtree and to the greater will, and exiled him and his warriors from the lands between. The reason she gave was that he had become too complacent, that a lord without enemies to fight would eventually turn inward and become a problem. But there is another reading, and it connects to the theory about Marika's long game against the greater will. If Marika already knew that the Elden Ring would be broken and that the lands between would need to be restored someday, she may have sent Godfrey away specifically so that he would grow stronger through struggle. The exiled Tarnished, Godfrey's warriors, wandered the world outside the lands between for generations, fighting and dying and being reborn, and they became the army that grace would eventually call back. Godfrey himself became Huara after his exile. He shed the identity of the Elden Lord and returned to who he was before Marika, a brutal, instinct-driven fighter, the creature beneath the title. When you finally face him at the end of the game, you first fight Godfrey the First Elden Lord, dignified and composed, and then, when you strip away his power, he becomes Huaralu, something rawer and more honest. That transition tells you more about his character than any item description could. The Knight of Black Knives. The Knight of Black Knives deserves its own careful exploration, because it is the single event that changed everything. It was not just an assassination, it was the first crack in the wall of the Golden Order. And understanding it changes how you see almost every major character in the game. On the Night of Black Knives, a group of assassins believed to be members of a sect connected to the Rune of Death infiltrated multiple locations simultaneously. Their weapons, the black knives, were imbued with a fragment of the Rune of Death, which had been stolen from the Elden Ring. The Rune of Death is exactly what it sounds like. It is the concept of true, complete death, the kind that ends both body and soul. The Elden Ring had contained this rune, which is part of why those who are graced cannot truly die. They simply revive. Remove the rune from the system, and you have a weapon capable of ending anything. The assassins targeted Godwyn the Golden and several of Marika's children, but the strikes were not all the same. Godwyn was killed in his soul only, leaving his body to persist. The others, it is suggested, had their bodies killed while their souls survived. This is important because Ranni, one of Marika and Radagon's children, was among the targeted demigods. Her body was killed, but her soul survived and took up residence in a doll made for her by Rennala, her mother. Ranni has been living in that doll ever since. The question of who orchestrated the Night of Black Knives has a complicated answer. The Black Knife assassins themselves were almost certainly Numen women, the same ancient people Marika came from. They were given the weapons and the mission by someone. The lore strongly suggests that Ranni was involved in planning it, possibly with Marika's tacit knowledge, or even her blessing. The goal seems to have been to steal the Rune of Death and use it to break the control of the greater will over the cycle of life and death in the lands between. By killing Godwyn's soul specifically, the assassins created something unprecedented. A living dead, a body with no soul, which should not be possible under the Golden Order's rules. This was the beginning of a new kind of existence, one that falls outside the greater will's authority. And that seems to have been the point. Ranni the Witch. Ranni is arguably the most carefully constructed character in Elden Ring. She is the one demigod who seems to have a genuine long-term plan, and her questline is the most elaborate in the game. But she is also deliberately evasive. She lies to you, or at least withholds the truth, for most of her questline, and even at the end, the full scope of what she's trying to do is left somewhat ambiguous. Ranni is the daughter of Radagon and Rennala. That makes her a child of both the Golden Order, through Radagon, and the Carian royal family, through Rennala. She was born into both worlds and rejected both of them. She abandoned her Empyrean status, which we will get to in a moment, and she arranged for her own body's death on the Night of Black Knives. She has been living in her doll form ever since, hiding from the Two Fingers, hiding from the greater will, and slowly assembling the pieces of a plan that she has been working on for centuries. What Ranni wants is the Age of Stars. This is one of the endings available in the game, and it is the one unlocked by completing her questline. The Age of Stars would essentially remove the lands between from the influence of all outer gods, including the greater will, and send it drifting into a long, cold journey through the cosmos, guided only by the moon. Ranni would become a god of this new age, a distant and undemanding one, offering what she calls a cold yet gentle destined death to the people of the lands between. The reason she wants this, one possible reading, is that she simply believes the greater will's version of order is a cage. The cycle of grace, rebirth, and submission to the Erdtree takes away people's ability to truly live and truly die. She wants to give people back their own fates. Another reading is that it is personal. She lost her body. She watched her half-brother Godwyn be killed in a way that left him permanently unable to rest. She participated in the Night of Black Knives and has been carrying that for centuries. The Age of Stars might be her way of making it mean something. The Empyrean Rani's abandoned status as an Empyrean is worth pausing on. An Empyrean is a being chosen by the Greater Will as a potential new vessel for the Elden Ring. The current vessel is Marika, but she's been inactive since the Shattering, and the Greater Will has been trying to prepare a successor. The candidates for this role are called Empyreans, and they are always demigods or beings with the blood of a god. The known Empyreans include Rani, Malenia, and Miquella. Each of them was given a shadow, a guardian assigned to them by the two fingers, to watch over and guide them. Rani's shadow was Blood, Malenia's was Finley, Miquella's was Mog. Though this is a particularly dark version of that relationship, Rani rejected her Empyrean status, which is why she killed her body. Without a physical form bound to the Golden Order, she cannot be made into the next vessel. Malenia is consumed by the Scarlet Rot, which makes her a vessel for that outer god rather than the Greater Will. Miquella's situation is the most complicated and the most disturbing, which we will get to shortly. Malenia and the Scarlet Rot Malenia, Blade of Miquella, is the most famous character in Elden Ring, largely because she is one of the hardest bosses in the game. But she is also one of the most genuinely tragic figures in the story, and her tragedy is not one she chose. Malenia was born with the Scarlet Rot inside her. She is a demigod, a child of Marika and Radagon, and she should by rights be one of the most powerful beings in the lands between. And she is in a physical sense, but she was also born cursed. The Scarlet Rot is not a disease she caught. It is part of her, woven into her at birth, and it has been slowly consuming her throughout her life. Her arm, her leg, eventually most of her body. She has lost pieces of herself over time, replaced them with prosthetics, and kept fighting. The lore suggests that her connection to the Scarlet Rot is tied to her status as an Empyrean. The outer god of Rot chose Malenia as its vessel, and that claim on her is in conflict with the Greater Will's claim on her as an Empyrean for the Elden Ring. She's being pulled between two outer gods, and the Scarlet Rot is winning. One possible reading is that this is why she was born the way she was. The outer god of Rot infected her before birth, staking its claim early. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, Malenia has spent her whole life trying to be something other than a vessel for Rot. She has fought constantly, not because she enjoys it, but because fighting is the one thing she can do that she chose. Her brother Miquella made her a halig tree, a massive tree grown from his own golden flesh, as an attempt to cure her. The halig tree, which is one of the late-game areas, is Miquella's gift to Malenia and to all the people the Golden Order rejected. Albinorics, those afflicted with rot. Anyone who did not fit into the Golden Order's version of grace. The Battle of Aeonia is Malenia's defining moment. She faced Radahn, the general of the Star Scourge, in a battle that ended in stalemate. When Radahn would not fall, Malenia bloomed. She released the Scarlet Rot inside her in a massive explosion that destroyed most of Caelid and infected Radahn himself. It is worth noting that she did not do this callously. Every account of her suggests she was in enormous pain, that the bloom was an act of last resort. And when it was over, she collapsed and was sealed away in a flower of rot waiting. The scarlet bloom transformed her. When you face her in the game, she is in a state between herself and the goddess of rot. Her second phase, when she transforms fully, shows you what would happen if the outer god of rot completely took over. She becomes something otherworldly, almost beautiful, in a terrifying way, with rot blooming from her like petals. The fight is devastating, not just mechanically, but narratively. You are fighting someone who is already losing a much older battle than the one against you. Miquella is the other child of Marika and Radagon, who was born cursed. Malenia was born with the scarlet rot. Miquella was born with eternal youth. He can never age. He will always have the body of a child. His power is enormous. He is described as the most powerful Empyrean, and he is one of the few beings capable of creating things that rival or exceed what the Golden Order can do. He made the Halig tree from his own body. He made an entirely new needle capable of removing the influence of outer gods from demigods. He was, by most accounts, genuinely kind and genuinely motivated by compassion. And then he disappeared. Miquella put himself into a cocoon of his own golden flesh inside the Halig tree, apparently attempting to accelerate his own maturation, to force his body to age past the childhood it was locked in. And while he was in there, Mog found him. Mog, Lord of Blood, is the child of Marika, who was imprisoned in the subterranean shunning grounds beneath the capital for being an omen, which is a kind of person the Golden Order considers cursed and impure. Mog worships the Formless Mother, a blood-related outer god, and he received visions and power from her. And at some point, he also became obsessed with Miquella. He broke into the Halig tree, ripped Miquella from his cocoon, and absconded with him to the Mokwin dynasty, a hidden underground palace soaked in blood. Mog's apparent plan was to use Miquella as the foundation of a new dynasty. He seems to have believed that Miquella would either willingly become his consort and co-ruler, or that he could force the situation through the power of the Formless Mother. When you find Miquella in the game, he is hanging limply from Mog's back, unresponsive, seemingly drained. The item descriptions around this suggest that Miquella chose to abandon his own feelings and ambitions, to divest himself of love and empathy in an attempt to shed his Empyrean status or to pursue something beyond. Exactly what Miquella is trying to become or escape is left deeply ambiguous. One reading is that he is simply trapped and has given up. Another is that he is using the situation, waiting, or pursuing something we do not yet understand. The Shadow of the Eared Tree DLC expands significantly on Miquella's story, though I will leave that for a later part of this video. For now, the important thing is that Miquella is missing. The Halig tree is still growing in his absence, and nobody who might have helped him is in a position to do so. Godric the Grafted Godric is one of the first major bosses you encounter, and he is also one of the most pathetic in the classical sense of the word. He is a demigod by blood, a descendant of Godfrey and Marika, but a distant one, and he was considered the weakest and most unremarkable of Marika's extended family. He was ridiculed at the Eared Tree court. He was called the least of the demigods, and that shame broke something in him. After the shattering, Godric became obsessed with grafting. He began attaching the limbs and bodies of defeated enemies and warriors to his own body, building himself into a grotesque accumulation of arms, legs, and eventually a dragon's arm, which he tears off and attaches to himself during your boss fight. The grafting is both a practical power grab and a psychological one. He is literally collecting strength from others because he does not believe his own is sufficient. Everything about Godric points to a man who was never able to live with who he was. His castle, Stormvale, is full of grafted soldiers. The people who served him were also subjected to grafting. His legacy is a monument to insecurity made flesh. And the saddest part is that despite all of this, he is one of the weakest demigods you face. The grafted arms give him an imposing appearance, but the underlying person was never able to become what he wanted to be. Rykard and the serpent Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, is among the more philosophically interesting of the demigods, though his philosophy is not exactly one you would want to adopt. He is the son of Radagon and Renala, Rani's older brother, and he was a general and a powerful figure in the Golden Order before the Shattering. After the Shattering, Rykard made a choice that most of the lands between would consider an abomination. He allowed himself to be devoured by the god-devouring serpent that lived in the volcano beneath Volcano Manor. And in being devoured, he merged with the serpent and became something new. Rykard is the serpent now, or the serpent is Rykard, depending on how you look at it. His blasphemy, as the Golden Order would see it, is that he gave himself over to something that stands entirely outside the Greater Will's authority. Rykard's stated goal was to consume the gods. He gathered an organization, the Volcano Manor, filled with people who have been rejected by the Golden Order or who wish to see it destroyed, and offered them a place to belong. His intent was eventually to grow powerful enough by consuming other gods to challenge and devour the Greater Will itself. Whether this is genuine rebellion or simply a kind of madness that the serpent represents is left unclear, but there is something in his attitude that suggests he genuinely found the merging with the serpent to be liberating. He no longer cares about the rules of the Golden Order. He is something new, something the Order does not have a category for. His wife, or the woman who might be his wife, is Tanith, the mistress of Volcano Manor. Tanith is human, refined, and utterly devoted to Rykard. When you defeat Rykard, she goes to where his body lies and begins eating his remains. It is one of the most disturbing images in the game, and it is entirely optional. You do not have to see it, but if you go back, it is there. One reading is that Tanith loved Rykard so completely that she wants to be with him in the only way left. Another is that Rykard's influence, or the serpent's, turned her into something she would not recognize. Morgott and Margit Morgott, the Omen King, is one of the most interesting subversions in Elden Ring. You encounter him first as Margit the Fell Omen, a mysterious cloaked figure who attacks you at the entrance to Stormvale Castle with a warning that you should give up your ambitions. Later, you find out that Margit is a disguise, and the person underneath is Morgott, one of Marika's own children, an Omen prince who was imprisoned beneath the capital. Omens are people born with the signs of the crucible on their bodies: horns, tails, scales. These are the ancient traits of the primordial world before the Golden Order. The Golden Order considers them cursed and impure, and most omens are killed at birth or imprisoned. Morgott and his twin brother Mohg are the children of Marika, who were born as omens and were imprisoned in the subterranean shunning grounds as a result. What makes Morgott extraordinary is that despite everything the Golden Order did to him, despite being imprisoned, reviled, and treated as a monster by the very faith his mother established, he remained devoted to the Erd Tree. He believed in it. He defended the capital with everything he had. When you reach Leyndell, the royal capital, you're fighting through a city that Morgott essentially held alone. He killed every Tarnished who tried to reach the Erd Tree before you. And when you finally face him, his last words are to the Erd Tree itself. He apologizes for being unable to protect it. There is something heartbreaking about that. A man who was rejected by the system, he dedicated his life to defend, and who remained faithful anyway. One reading of Morgott is that he is simply someone who could not let go of the idea that the Erd Tree was worth protecting, even when the Erd Tree clearly did not think the same about him. Another reading is more generous, that he understood the Erd Tree as something separate from the Golden Order's politics, as a natural force rather than a religious institution, and that his devotion was to the tree itself, rather than to the people who used it to justify oppression. The loathsome Dungeeater. The Dungeeater is one of the more unpleasant characters in Elden Ring, deliberately so. He is a Tarnished like you, called back by grace, but his purpose is not to restore the Elden Ring. His purpose is to curse the world. The Dungeeater has spent his existence seeking out and killing people with grace, which is a specific and terrible act, because killing someone with grace, in the way he does it, prevents them from being reborn. He defiles their corpses in a way that the law suggests corrupts their ability to return to the cycle. Why does he do this? His questline reveals that he was an omen. He was born with the signs of the crucible, and spent his life being treated as cursed and monstrous by the Golden Order society around him. He developed a philosophy, and it is important to call it that rather than just madness, because it has an internal logic. He believes that the only way to end the suffering of omens is to make everyone share it. If he can defile enough people with grace, the next Elden Lord will inherit a world soaked in that defilement, and the new age will be one where everyone knows what it feels like to carry a curse. One of the endings of the game gives him what he wants. The blessing of despair ending is achieved by giving the dungeoneer what he needs and allowing his vision to shape the new age. It is presented as a bad ending, and by most readings it is, but there is also something in it that the game does not entirely dismiss. The dungeoneer's logic is twisted, but the injustice he is responding to was real. Fia and the Deathbed Companions. Fia is one of the NPCs you meet early in the game, who holds you when you talk to her. She is a deathbed companion, which is a specific role in the Lands Between. Deathbed companions perform what amounts to a ritual function. They lie with the dead, holding them, passing something of themselves to the corpse. In return, they receive something of the dead person's power. This sounds purely mechanical, but the lore around Fia suggests it is also deeply personal for her. She is collecting the power and essence of dead warriors, and she is building towards something. Her questline, which is hidden in the deep-root depths beneath the Erd tree's roots, eventually reveals that she is trying to give a proper death and rebirth to Godwyn the Golden, the Prince of Death whose body writhes in a grotesque parody of life beneath the Erd tree, was denied a true death when his soul was killed on the Night of Black Knives. Fia wants to fix that. She holds within her the rune of death and intends to use it to allow Godwyn to be born again, properly, as a new kind of being born from the dead. One of the game's endings involves Fia succeeding. The Age of the Duskborn ending gives a gentle, gradual death to those who receive grace, making death something earned rather than endlessly deferred. It is a melancholy ending, but not a hopeless one. It suggests that the acceptance of real death might be more compassionate than a system that forces endless rebirth. Fia herself is warm and sad and determined. She knows that what she's doing is dangerous, and that most people in the Lands Between would consider it blasphemy. She does it anyway, because she believes Godwyn deserves rest. Dee and his brother Dee, Hunter of the Dead, is one of the more cryptic NPCs, and his story is tangled up with Fia in a way that takes time to unpack. Dee is a hunter, which means he kills those tainted by the influence of Deathroot, the substance that spreads from Godwyn's dead body and corrupts people. He is cold, efficient. He does not like ambiguity. When he discovers that Fia is carrying the power of the dead, he becomes hostile to her. When Fia eventually kills him, it feels jarring, but it makes sense for her character. She cannot let someone like Dee undo what she's trying to build. The twist is Dee's twin brother, who you can find imprisoned in a place called the Shunning Grounds. He is physically identical to Dee, but clearly different in temperament and in some fundamental way that the lore does not fully explain. When you give Dee's brother the armor that Dee wore, he uses it to take revenge on Fia. He finds her in the deep-root depths and kills her. What makes this strange and unsettling is that the game does not frame his revenge as heroic or as villainous. It is just a thing that happens. Dee is dead. His brother carries that grief. Fia killed Dee and accepted that as part of her path. These are not simple moral situations. The game lays them out and lets you sit with them. Nephili Lu. Nephili Lu is one of the tarnished NPCs who exists in a complicated relationship with identity and legacy. She is an adopted daughter of Sir Gideon Ofnir, one of the more important characters at the Round Table Hold. She is also, by blood, a daughter of Hora Lu, meaning she is Godfrey's child. Nephili is a warrior who fights with storm-calling powers, the same kind Godfrey used before he gave them up. She does not know her true origin for most of her story. She is simply someone who fights because she is good at it and because she cares. Her questline follows her as she deals with a crisis of purpose and then eventually reclaims herself by becoming the ruler of the Lands Between's northern region, Stormvale, after Godric is defeated. It is one of the quieter, more optimistic questlines in the game. Nephili does not resolve her story by discovering some cosmic truth. She just finds a purpose she believes in and commits to it. The legacy of Godfrey's bloodline continues in her, not through violence or power grabs, but through the simpler act of ruling with care. Sir Gideon Ofnir. Gideon is the master of the Round Table Hold, which is the hub area where Tarnished gather. He positions himself as a source of information and guidance, and for most of the game, he is helpful, if a little cold. He knows an enormous amount about the Lands Between and its history, and then, near the end of the game, he stands in your way and tries to kill you. His reasoning is that he has concluded the Two Fingers are wrong. He has gathered information from all over the world and has decided that restoring the Elden Ring is not something the Lands Between actually needs. He does not believe a Tarnished should become Elden Lord. He does not believe in any of the endings the game offers. It is a fascinating turn, and the lore supports his pessimism to a degree. He has read everything. He knows what is underneath the Erd Tree, what Marika actually did, what the Greater Will actually wants. He has looked at the full picture and has decided it is not a picture worth completing. He is not evil exactly. He is disillusioned, and he has decided that his disillusionment makes him correct, but he is also, possibly, a coward. The game leaves it open. Is he a man who genuinely believes intervention is wrong, or is he someone who has gathered so much knowledge that he has become paralyzed by it and is looking for a philosophical justification for inaction? The Frenzied Flame and the Three Fingers. The Frenzied Flame is the most extreme element of Elden Ring's cosmology. If the Greater Will represents order and the various other outer gods represent competing visions of what the world could be, the Frenzied Flame represents the end of all distinctions. Total entropy, a fire that burns not to destroy, but to merge everything into undifferentiated unity. The Three Fingers are the counterpart to the Two Fingers. Where the Two Fingers relay the will of the Greater Will, the Three Fingers apparently relay the Frenzied Flame. They live beneath the subterranean shunning grounds, accessible only through a specific and very uncomfortable sequence involving stripping off all your equipment and dropping through a series of holes. When you find them, they brand you with the mark of the Frenzied Flame, and unless you undo this later, it locks you into a specific ending. The Lord of Frenzied Flame ending has you burn the Erd Tree, and the Lands Between, and everything in them, merging all distinctions and all existence into the Frenzied Flame. It is presented as a catastrophe, a bad ending, and by any conventional measure, it is. But the lore around the Frenzied Flame is more nuanced than a simple apocalypse button. Hyetta is an NPC who follows the path of the Frenzied Flame. She is blind, guided by the light she senses at the edges of things. Her questline takes her slowly toward the Three Fingers, and when she finally reaches them, she becomes a Finger Maiden, a servant of the Frenzied Flame. Her perspective on it is not horror. She describes it as warmth, as connection, as the end of loneliness. One possible reading of the Frenzied Flame ending is that it is not simply destruction, but the restoration of the crucible, the primordial state before distinctions were imposed at the cost of every individual identity. Whether that is worse than what the world already is depends entirely on your perspective. The character Shabriri is the one who guides you toward the Frenzied Flame. He can inhabit the body of Yura, a hunter NPC, after Yura's death. Shabriri is defined by his cursed eyes, the eyes of madness, which are connected to the Frenzied Flame. He presents its agenda not as destruction, but as liberation. He is a salesman for entropy, And the unsettling thing is that some of what he says is not wrong. The eternal cities beneath the lands. Between far underground, there are ruins of ancient cities. The main ones you encounter are Nokron and Nokstella, collectively referred to as the eternal cities. These were once civilizations that sought to ascend to a higher state, to become something divine through their own power rather than through the grace of the greater will. And for this ambition, they were buried. The eternal cities were condemned by the greater will's forces. The crucible was invoked and the cities were sent underground, buried beneath the lands, between where they would remain in a state of eternal twilight, never seeing the real sky again. Their people, the Nox, continue to live there in a strange, subdued existence. They still pursue their ancient ambitions in small ways. They still maintain their silverwork and their celestial crafts. But the dream of reaching the stars is long dead. The stars, by the way, are important. The Nox pursued celestial divinity. Rani's ambition involves stars. Seluvais, one of Rani's servants, is a Nox who helps her because he believes her age of stars is the closest thing to what his people once dreamed of. There is a thread connecting the buried ambitions of the Nox to Rani's plan, and it is one of the more touching connections in the game. Nokron is significant for another reason. When Radahan is defeated, the stars begin to move again. Radahan had been holding the stars in place with his gravity magic, which sounds like a good thing until you understand that one of those stars needed to fall to open Nokron. Rani's questline requires you to defeat Radahan so that the star can fall and the path to Nokron opens. Radahan was unknowingly or knowingly preventing Rani from reaching the next stage of her plan. His defeat is the key. Radahan, Star Scourge Radahan, is introduced as a villain, or at least an obstacle. He is the giant red-haired demigod who has been driven mad by the scarlet rot that infected him during the Battle of Aeonia. He wanders the wailing dunes of Kylid on his small horse Leonard, hunting anything that moves, barely sentient anymore. But Radan's history before the rot is that of someone deeply admirable. He was one of the greatest generals in the lands between and the strongest demigod in raw physical power. He loved his horse Leonard so much that when his gravity magic grew strong enough to make his own weight unbearable for any normal horse, he used gravity magic to reduce his own weight so that Leonard could still carry him. He studied gravity magic under the Carians, specifically under an Alabaster Lord, and he became the strongest practitioner of it in the world. He held the stars in place to prevent celestial disaster, which is a massive, sustained magical effort that he maintained for years. When you kill Radan at the Radan festival, which is framed as a mercy killing in some ways, since he has lost himself to the rot, the response from most of the world's NPCs is sorrow. Not relief, not celebration, sorrow. Alexander the Iron Fist, one of the game's most beloved incidental characters, travelled to the festival not to mourn Radan, but to honour him by fighting alongside other warriors in the battle. It is a strange kind of respect. Radan is also the child of Radagon and Renala, which makes him Rani's brother, and this means Rani needed her own brother's death, or at least his defeat, to achieve her plan. Whether she feels anything about that is unclear. Rani is not someone who shows her feelings easily. Renala, Queen of the Full Moon. Renala is one of the more quietly devastating figures in the game. She was the head of the Carian royal family and one of the most powerful sorcerers in the lands between. She and her family mastered moon magic, which is distinct from the sorcery of the Academy of Raya Lucaria that she eventually took over. Renala made the Academy. She led it, she ruled it, and then Radagon came. Radagon arrived as a champion of the Golden Order, and the two of them fell in love, or something that looked like love, from the outside. They married. They had 3 children together, Rykard, Radan, and Rani. And then Radagon left. He left Renala to return to Marika, which at minimum means he abandoned her, and possibly means more than that, if your theory about Radagon and Marika's nature is the right one. Renala, after Radagon left, broke. She withdrew into the grand library of Raya Lucaria and stopped functioning as a leader. She clutched a small golden egg, a keepsake from Radagon, and she has been singing to it and retreating into memory ever since. The scholars of the Academy tried to overthrow her and take control. They failed, because the younger students remained loyal to her. She is found in the library, surrounded by students who rock her gently like a child, and she is a boss fight, though not a hostile one in the usual sense. She is not attacking you with intent. She is defending a grief she has never been able to put down. After you defeat her, she becomes available as the game's rebirth mechanic. She can reincarnate you, reshaping your character's stats. It is a gameplay function, but it also points to something her lore suggests. Renala spent so much time retreating into memory and fantasy, reshaping things in her mind to how they were, or how she wished they were, that she has developed a genuine power over memory and form. She's not just broken. She is broken in a way that has created something new. The Carian royal family and the moon. The Carians are connected to the moon in ways the game does not fully explain. Their magic is lunar. Their castle, Caria Manor, sits in Leonia and is watched over by Renala's 3 daughters, though they are strange and monstrous now. The sorceries of the Carian line involve blades made of pure moonlight, and there is a quality to their magic that feels older and more alien than the Academy's crystalline sorcery. One possible reading is that the Carian connection to the moon is also an outer god connection. The influence of the moon as a force distinct from the greater will has been theorized to be the same outer god that Rani aligns herself with in her Age of Stars ending. If that is the case, then Renala's family was connected to this entity long before Rani made her deal with it. The moon magic of the Carians might be the accumulated influence of an outer god that has been working in the lands between through this bloodline for generations. What the moon god wants, if that is what it is harder to say. It does not seem malevolent in the way the Scarlet Rock god does. It is cold, distant. The magic associated with it is beautiful, but impersonal. Rani's promise of a cold, yet gentle destined death could be read as the moon god's philosophy made explicit. It does not warm you, it does not protect you, but it will not devour you either. It simply lets things be what they are, and end when they end. The Academy of Raya Lucaria. The Academy is one of the most interesting institutions in the Lands Between, because it exists in tension with both the Golden Order and the Carian royal family. It is full of sorcerers who pursue knowledge for its own sake, which puts them at odds with the Golden Order's faith-based approach to power. But it was built under Renala's authority, which places it in the Carian sphere. After Radagon left Renala and the Carians made a political alliance with Marika rather than a hostile one, the Academy became something in between. It was neither fully loyal to the Golden Order nor fully independent. The scholars there spent their time studying primal glintstone, which is essentially the crystallized soul of stars, and developing increasingly sophisticated sorceries. There is lore suggesting that the sorcerers of the Academy were pursuing a kind of immortality, not through the Erdtree's cycle of rebirth, but through the manipulation of souls at a fundamental level. The full moon sorceries of the Carians and the primordial glintstone research of the Academy are different approaches to the same underlying question. What is a soul, and can it be made permanent? The enemies you fight in Raya Lucaria include scholars who have transformed their own bodies through their research and crystalline creatures that emerge from their experiments. The Academy is a place where the pursuit of knowledge went somewhere its founders may not have intended. Destined death and the rune of death. Let us talk about the rune of death more carefully, because it is central to almost everything. The rune of death is the concept of permanent, complete death, the kind that ends a soul entirely rather than allowing it to return. Under the Golden Order's management of the Elden Ring, this rune was sealed away. The Elden Ring, as maintained by Marika essentially removed the concept of true death from the lands between. People could die, but they would be reborn by grace. This sounds beneficial, and in some ways it is, but it also means that nothing can truly end. Godwyn cannot rest, the cycle cannot be broken. The greater will can continue to feed off the lands between indefinitely because nothing in the system truly concludes. By sealing away the rune of death, Marika, or the greater will through Marika, created a kind of immortality trap. Everything and everyone is recycled endlessly in service of the Order. When the Black Knife assassins stole a fragment of the rune of death and used it on the Night of Black Knives, they introduced the concept of permanent death back into a world that had been without it. This is catastrophic. From the Golden Order's perspective, it is also, from a different angle, a restoration. The ability to truly die is the ability to truly end, to have a story with a conclusion rather than an infinite loop. The character who is most associated with destined death as a concept is Malekith the Black Blade. Malekith is Marika's shadow, the guardian assigned to her by the Greater Will. He was charged with carrying the rune of death so that it could not be used against the world again. He carries it in his blade, and he is one of the hardest and most dramatic boss fights in the game. When you defeat Malekith, you release the rune of death back into the world, which immediately begins killing the Undying and the Elden Grace constructs that maintain the cycle. It is a moment of enormous consequence, and the game presents it as both necessary and terrible. The Fell God and the Fire Giants. The Fire Giants are one of the older races in the lands between, and their history with Marika is one of the most tragic backstories in a game full of them. The Fire Giants were the keepers of the Fell God, which seems to be an outer god associated with flame, possibly the same flame that ignites the Erd tree in certain endings. They maintained the Flame of Ruin, a fire capable of burning the Erd tree itself. Marika waged war against the Fire Giants to extinguish this threat. Her armies, led by Godfrey, eventually defeated them. But rather than simply killing the last Fire Giant, Marika cursed him. She gouged out his eye, the eye that could see the Fell God, and chained him to the mountaintops of the giants. She left him alive, chained, carrying the knowledge of how to ignite the Flame of Ruin, unable to use it or die. The last Fire Giant is one of the bosses you face, and like many bosses in Elden Ring, fighting him feels like an act of violence against something that was already a victim. He is massive, broken, sealed in place by an ancient curse, and he fights with a kind of desperate fury that has nothing to do with malice and everything to do with a creature that has been held in one place for thousands of years. When you kill him, he ignites the flame as his final act, because you need the flame to reach Farum Azula and ultimately to burn the Erd tree. There is a dark irony in this. Marika spent enormous effort to prevent the Erd tree from being burned and sealed away the last creature capable of doing it, only for her own chosen tarnished, guided by her own grace, to eventually kill that creature and use its dying act to do exactly what she feared. Unless, of course, Marika wanted the Erd tree to burn, which brings us back around to the question of her true intentions. Farum Azula, crumbling. Farum Azula is one of the most visually striking places in the game. It is a city suspended in perpetual storm, its buildings falling apart, held aloft by nothing obvious, with fragments of architecture orbiting slowly in the wind. It is ancient, older than the current age, older than the Golden Order, older possibly than Marika herself. The creatures that inhabit Farum Azula, the beastmen and the ancient dragons, are not enemies of the current age. They are remnants of an older one. The serpent enemies suggest that the location has a connection to Rykard's lineage, or the same ancient forces that the serpent represents. The dragons there include ancient ones that predate the dragon wars of Godwyn's era. Most importantly, Farum Azula is where Malekith guards the Rune of Death. It is where Dragonlord Placidusax made his home. Placidusax is one of the most mysterious figures in the game. He was an Elden Lord, which implies he served a god, but the lore says his god was taken from him. He has been waiting in Farum Azula ever since, holding on to a title that no longer has meaning, serving a god that is no longer there. Who was Placidusax's god? The game does not say directly. One popular theory is that Placidusax served an older outer god, one that predated the Greater Will's dominance of the lands between. Another theory is that his god was the Greater Will's predecessor, or an earlier version of the same force. The fact that he remains in Farum Azula, which exists slightly outside the normal flow of time, given its suspended and fragmentary nature, suggests that he is waiting in a literal sense. He is locked in a moment before his god left, unable to move forward. Fighting Placidusax feels like fighting grief. He is enormous and powerful, but his attack patterns have a quality of desperation rather than aggression. He is not defending territory. He is protecting a memory. The Erd Tree and its true nature. The Erd Tree is the most visible feature of the lands between. You can see it from everywhere. It is the source of grace which appears as golden light that guides the tarnished toward it and toward their destiny. It is the place where the dead return when they receive grace. It is the biological and spiritual center of the Golden Order. But the Erd Tree is not natural. The lore suggests it is a construct, something planted. The roots of the Erd Tree reach deep beneath the lands between, and in the deep root depths you can see Godwyn's body merged with those roots, the Prince of Death becoming part of the tree itself. This is disturbing for several reasons. It implies that the dead who return to the Erd Tree are not simply at peace. They are incorporated into the tree in some way. Their substance feeds it. The Erd Tree also houses the Elden Beast, which is the final boss of the game and the physical form of the Greater Will's will in the lands between. The Elden Beast is not Marika. It is not a god in the human sense. It is an emissary, a construct sent by the Greater Will to maintain the Elden Ring's presence in the lands between. It dwells inside the Erd Tree and emerges when you face Radagon's final form. The Elden Beast's attacks are celestial in nature: stars, constellations, light that feels less like fire and more like the weight of the cosmos. Fighting it feels less like combat and more like being held in place by something that does not understand the concept of cruelty or compassion, that simply maintains its purpose, the way a gravitational force maintains its pull. After you kill the Elden Beast, you become the new Elden Lord, whichever ending you choose. But the nature of that victory is complicated. You have killed the Greater Will's physical presence in the lands between. You have taken the throne of a system that was designed and maintained by something that is still out there, still watching from beyond the stars. The question of what happens next, after your chosen ending, is left entirely open. The two fingers and the guidance of grace. The two fingers are the physical intermediaries of the Greater Will in the lands between. They appear as enormous, ancient, finger-like creatures, usually found in important locations, attended by finger maidens, who translate their communication into something the mortal world can understand. Each Empyrean was assigned two fingers. Each major site of grace has connections to the two-finger network. The golden guidance that leads the tarnished forward is relayed through this system. The problem that becomes apparent as the game progresses is that the two fingers have not received new guidance since the shattering. They do not know what to do. They are still relaying the old instructions, guide the tarnished to become Elden Lord, because that is the last thing they were told to do, but they do not understand the full situation any better than anyone else. Ennaya, the finger reader at the Round Table Hold, translates the two fingers' communications for you. She is thoughtful and melancholy, and there is a sense that she has been doing this job long enough to understand that the two fingers are not all-knowing. They are a relay system without a sender. This is part of why Gideon Ofnir's conclusion, that following the two fingers guidance is a mistake has some validity, even if his response to that conclusion is wrong. The guidance of the two fingers does lead to a restored Elden Ring, but restored to whose specifications? The greater will's. And the greater will's specifications may not be what is best for the lands between. The Black Knife Assassins continued. The Black Knife Assassins deserve more time because their identity and origin is one of the more carefully hidden details in the game. They were women. The lore consistently refers to them with female pronouns. They were Numen women, which connects them to Marika's people. And they were deeply faithful, or at least deeply committed to their mission. There is an assassin you can find in the snow-covered ruins of Ordina, the liturgical town, who still guards the Black Knife Assassin armor set. She will never stop searching for her target, the description says. Even in death, her purpose drives her. The armor itself is described as worn by those who participated in the Night of Black Knives, and it is treated with a reverence that suggests these were not simple killers. They were true believers. The question of who gave them their orders is pointed but not answered. The lore around Rani suggests she was involved in organizing the night. The Numen connection to Marika suggests Marika may have known, but there is also the possibility of a third party, some organization or force that has left fewer traces. The Black Knife Assassin's presence, scattered across the lands between, still carrying out missions or still waiting for orders that never came, suggests an organization that was prepared to act but was caught in the aftermath of an event that changed everything. The Albinaurics. The Albinaurics are one of the most quietly heartbreaking peoples in the lands between. They are artificial humans created by the Grand Lift Keeper, who is trying to create life outside the Erdtree system. They look mostly human, but with amphibian or ceramic qualities, pale and smooth. They were not given grace. They were not part of the greater will's plan. They exist outside the loop. Because they were outside the system, they were also outside the protections the system offered. During the Shattering's chaos, the Albinaurics were hunted. Not for any act of aggression, but simply for being different and convenient targets for violence. Many fled to the underground, to the hidden lands beneath Liurnia, where they established a community. Latenna the Albinauric is an NPC, whose questline asks you to help her reach the Halig Tree, specifically to reach the Albinauric offspring of the Albinauric woman who created the second generation of Albinaurics. Latenna's own legs do not work. She rides her wolf. She is going home to die, essentially, or to deliver a message, or to witness something. Her questline does not resolve in a triumphant way. It resolves quietly, in a place where Albinaurics are gathered and where she can finally rest. The second generation of Albinaurics were created differently from the first. First generation Albinaurics have amphibian qualities. Second generation looks more like ceramic spheres, humans curled in on themselves, like unborn creatures. The second generation was the Albinauric woman's attempt to create people who could not be hunted, who could hide in plain sight as objects. The tragedy of the Albinaurics is the tragedy of any people who were created and then left without the protections that creation implied. The Erdtree burial and grace. When people die in the lands between, and they have grace, their bodies return to the Erdtree to be recycled. This is presented as something comforting and sacred in the Golden Order. Your body will rest in the tree. You will be part of something larger. But the deep-root depths reveals what this actually looks like. The bodies do not simply dissolve peacefully. The roots of the Erdtree dig into them. The physical substance of the dead becomes part of the tree's infrastructure. The Golden Order's afterlife is not rest, it is incorporation. This changes how you read some of the smaller details in the game. The Erdtree's glow, the warmth that golden light seems to carry. These are built from the substance of the dead, from centuries of recycled bodies and souls, from Marika's chosen people being absorbed endlessly into the system that promised to protect them. It also changes how you read the characters who are fighting for alternatives to this system. Fire, who wants Godwyn to have a real death. Rani, who wants to give people a genuine end outside the Erd Tree system. The Dunjata, whose method is wrong, but whose objection is based in something real. They are all responding in different ways to the same essential problem. The Erd Tree does not protect you. It uses you. Miriel and the Turtles. This is a lighter note in an otherwise heavy game. Miriel is a giant turtle who wears a pope hat and runs the Church of Vows. He is one of the most beloved characters in Elden Ring, and with good reason. He is gentle, learned, long-lived, and genuinely kind. He has been at the Church of Vows for a very long time, tending to it and welcoming visitors, and he has accumulated an enormous amount of knowledge about the Lands Between's history. Miriel does not judge. He is patient with your questions. He explains things carefully, and when you reach the end of the game and the world begins to change dramatically, he stays at the Church of Vows. He says it is where he belongs. The turtle enemies in the game, the giant tortoises you encounter in various places, are described in their lore as sages and keepers of knowledge who retreated into themselves as the world became more dangerous. Miriel is the most evolved form of this, a creature that chose to become a slow and stable presence rather than participate in the chaos of the Shattering and the demigod wars. There is wisdom in that, the game seems to suggest. Not everything needs to be part of the conflict. The Church of Vows also houses a giant celestial dew item, which allows you to atone for actions that made NPCs hostile to you. The church exists as a place of absolution, which ties back to one of the recurring themes in the Lands Between. The question of what can be forgiven and what cannot, of what makes a person worthy of redemption and what simply makes them a person in circumstances they did not choose. Ancient dragons. The ancient dragons are a subject that deserves extended attention because they are one of the oldest elements of the world's history, and their relationship with the Lands Between has shifted enormously over time. In the very ancient past, before the Golden Order, the dragons were dominant. They worshipped an elden lord of their own, possibly Placidusax, and they had a relationship with the divine that was entirely separate from the Greater Will's system. When the Greater Will came to the Lands Between and established the Elden Ring, the dragons were not included in the New Order. They were the Old Order, and the New Order gradually displaced them. Wars were fought. Godwyn made peace with the dragons after one particular conflict by defeating their champion in single combat and then offering terms. That peace was fragile and eventually broke down. The ancient dragons that remain in Farum Azula are the last of their kind in any organised sense. Other dragons still exist in the Lands Between, including Smarag in the Academy area and various others, but they are wild or semi-feral. The ancient dragons in Farum Azula are still connected to the old world in ways that most creatures are not. They have seen multiple ages. They remember a time before the Erd Tree. There is a dragon communion system in the game that allows you to consume dragon hearts and gain draconic powers. This is presented as consuming the essence of the dragon, which is simultaneously an act of power and an act of erasure. Each dragon heart you consume is a piece of that ancient history gone. The other side of this is the Dragon Communion Church, which suggests that there was once a formal relationship between humans and dragons built around this exchange. Humans gained power from dragons willingly given. What the dragons received in return is less clear, though the lore suggests it was a form of spiritual exchange, that something of the human was given to the dragon as well. The Shattering and the Demigod. Wars. The Shattering was what happened after Marika broke the Elden Ring. The great runes scattered to her children and to various powerful figures across the Lands Between, and those who received them began fighting over supremacy. The Shattering was not a clean war with sides and fronts and objectives. It was a chaos of competing interests, shifting alliances, and total devastation. By the time it was over, the lands between was a ruin. The major players in the shattering included Radun, who held the north, Malenia and Mikella in the east, until Mikella disappeared and Malenia fought Radun, Morgoth in the capital, Rykard in the south, Godric in the far west, Moog underground, Rani quietly working her own angle throughout. The shattering killed enormous numbers of people and destroyed entire regions. Caelid was devastated by the Battle of Ionia. The capital became a fortress under siege. The academy sealed itself. The Haligtree was incomplete. Every major institution in the lands between was either destroyed, isolated, or compromised by the war. What makes the shattering particularly tragic is that it was not a war anyone exactly chose. The demigods did not decide one day to go to war. The great runes had enormous power and influence. Carrying one changed you, made you obsessive, amplified your existing traits until they became all-consuming. Godric's insecurity became his grafting. Rykard's philosophical rebellion became his merger with the serpent. Moog's devotion to the formless mother intensified until he was willing to abduct Mikella. The great runes did not create these problems. They found what was already there and made it louder. This is one of the most quietly effective elements of Elden Ring's lore. The demigods are not simply evil. They are people who were given enormous power under circumstances of grief and chaos, and who could not hold themselves together. The tragedy is not that they were villains. The tragedy is that they were broken people with too much power in a world that had lost its centre. Leyndell, the royal capital. Leyndell is one of the most beautiful and most haunted places in the game. It was the capital of the lands between under the Golden Order, the seat of Marika's rule, and the site of the Erd Tree's base. The city is built around and into the roots of the Erd Tree, its architecture woven through with the tree's golden substance. When you reach it, Leyndell has been through the shattering. It is not abandoned, but it is diminished. Morgoth has been defending it alone. The Night Order that once protected it, the Crucible Knights and the Erd Tree Knights, is reduced to a handful of individuals and their undead remnants. The city still functions barely, but its population of living people is thin. What you find beneath Leyndell, the subterranean shunning grounds, is one of the game's most confrontational revelations. The Golden Order, for all its talk of grace and divine order, built its capital on top of a dungeon. And in that dungeon it locked away omens, including Mok and Morgoth, including people whose only crime was being born with the wrong physical traits. The capital's splendour is literally built over its own shame. The shunning grounds go very deep. At their bottom, past the Mog boss fight location, past the River of Blood, there is a path that requires removing all your equipment and jumping through a series of openings. This leads to the Cathedral of the Forsaken and then, beyond that, to the Three Fingers. The deepest, most hidden, most forsaken place in the capital is the home of the Frenzied Flame. This placement feels deliberate. The thing the Golden Order most fears and most needs to hide is locked at the bottom of the thing it most wants to forget. The Tarnished and the nature of grace. You, the player, are a Tarnished. You were born with grace, which marked you as one of Marika's chosen people, and then at some point, your grace faded. You lost the connection to the Erd Tree. You were exiled from the lands between, and spent an unknown amount of time outside it, surviving in the world beyond. Then the grace returned. Not from the Erd Tree directly, but from something else. The golden grace that now guides you moves in a way that is described as different from the orderly golden grace of the Erd Tree. It is more chaotic, more alive. Some characters notice this and comment on it. Melina describes you as someone who burns with something the Erd Tree did not give you. This raises the question of what the grace calling the Tarnished back actually is. The standard reading is that it is the greater will acting through the Two Fingers network to call back warriors capable of restoring the Elden Ring. But there are other readings. One is that Marika called the Tarnished back herself, that the grace guiding them is hers, and not the greater will's, and that she chose these particular exiles for a reason. Another reading, connected to certain item descriptions, is that the grace guiding the Tarnished is something older, something from the Crucible, something that does not follow the rules of the current order. The Tarnished, whatever their origin, share one trait that makes them uniquely valuable. They cannot truly die. They respawn at sites of grace when killed. This is not quite immortality. It is something more specific. They are caught in a loop, like a more mobile version of the undying created by the Golden Order's management of the Rune of Death. They will keep trying until they succeed. The lands between is full of the remnants of Tarnished who tried and failed, whose ambitions drove them to madness or despair, who became the enemy bosses and hollow invaders you face throughout the game. Melina is one of the most persistently mysterious figures in Elden Ring. She appears to you early on, offering to be your finger maiden, an important role that allows you to level up using runes. She has one eye always closed. She seems to know things she should not know, and her origins are never fully explained. The lore around Melina suggests she was born from a flame, possibly the Erd Tree's flame, and that she is connected to Marika in a way that is not clearly defined. Some theories suggest she is Marika's daughter, though not one of the named demigods. Others suggest she is something the Erd Tree created, possibly as a response to the Shattering, possibly as Marika's attempt to send something of herself into the world. Melina's closed eye is one of the more discussed details. When she opens it, the eye appears different from her normal eye. The content of what is seen there is debated. Some think her closed eye connects to the frenzied flame, others to a deathly vision, others to the flame of the Erd Tree itself. She does not explain it. What Melina explicitly wants is to burn herself in the flame of the Erd Tree. This is how you access the forge at the mountaintops of the giants, which is needed to proceed through the endgame. She was born for this purpose, she suggests. She wants to give herself to the flame to open the way. And if you take the frenzied flame and use that instead, she becomes hostile. She promises to find you after you become the Lord of Frenzied Flame and put an end to you herself. This is one of the most significant NPC reactions in the game. Melina, who has been your quiet companion throughout, becomes your enemy not because she disapproves of you choosing power, but because you chose the one thing that would burn everything she believes in. The interpretation of Melina as Marika's daughter or creation fits with this. If Marika had some stake in the fate of the lands between Beyond the Greater Will's design, she might have sent Melina as a guide for the Tarnished to make sure the ending that came about was one she could accept. The frenzied flame ending is not one Marika could accept. It burns everything, including whatever Marika hoped to achieve. The loathsome Dungeeter's deeper context. Let us return to the Dungeeter for a moment, because there is a dimension of his story that tends to get lost in the general discomfort of his character. The Dungeeter is genuinely terrible. He is a murderer who targets people with grace and commits acts of violence against their bodies after death. There is no softening this. But the omen stigma in the lands between is genuinely brutal, and the Dungeeter experienced it fully. The Golden Order's treatment of omens is institutional violence. Children are killed at birth. Adults are imprisoned in the shunning grounds. The cursed marks of the Crucible are treated as stains on the divine order rather than as connections to the ancient world. A person who grew up as an omen in Golden Order society would have experienced complete systemic dehumanization. The Dungeeter's response to this is not one you can endorse, but it comes from somewhere real. He is trying to break the system, the only way he can imagine, by contaminating it from the inside. If he can defile enough of the Order's chosen people, the Golden Order's hierarchy of the blessed and the cursed becomes meaningless. Everyone is cursed. The distinction disappears. The reason this matters is that the Dungeator is not a random, grotesque addition to the game's roster. He is the logical extreme of what happens when someone is broken by an unjust system and reaches for the most destructive solution available. He is a warning, not about omens or about cursed people, but about what happens when an institution refuses to make room for people who do not fit its definitions. The finger readers and the communication gap. The finger readers, like Enia at the Round Table Hold, occupy a specific and somewhat poignant role in the Lands Between's religious structure. They serve as translators for the two fingers, reading the messages that the two fingers convey and passing them on in human language. But the two fingers do not actually speak. They communicate through something more like impression or resonance. The finger readers are interpreting a signal, not transcribing a message. This introduces the possibility of error, of misinterpretation, of a finger reader who hears what they expect to hear, or what they need to hear, rather than what is actually being communicated. The two fingers also, as mentioned earlier, have not received new guidance since the shattering. They are broadcasting old instructions into a changed world. The finger readers are faithfully translating an outdated message, and the people following that message are doing so without knowing that the sender has been silent for generations. This is not presented as a conspiracy. The two fingers are not deliberately misleading anyone. The finger readers are not lying. The system has simply outlived the context that gave it meaning, and nobody knows how to update it or what updating it would even look like. The Round Table Hold. The Round Table Hold is where the Tarnished gather. It exists outside of any physical location in the Lands Between, accessible through the guidance of grace, and it functions as a neutral space where people who have answered the call can meet and exchange information. The idea of a round table with no head is significant. It implies an equality among the assembled Tarnished that the rest of the world does not grant them. But the Round Table Hold is also a place of failure. Most of the Tarnished you meet there have already given up or are on their way to giving up. Hugh, the blacksmith, is bound to the hold against his will. Unable to leave, his life's purpose reduced to serving whoever walks through. Diallos is trying to find his missing servant and ends up following a path that leads to tragedy. Roderica has recently arrived and is uncertain what she's doing at all. The hold is full of people at the beginning of something they do not understand, and the game follows several of them through to their ends. What the hold represents, more than a home base or a gameplay hub, is a moment of gathering before dispersal. These are people who have been called back from exile and given purpose, and they are each going to follow that purpose to very different places. Some will find something worth the journey, others will not. Deathroot and the Deathbird. Deathroot is the substance that spreads from Godwyn's decaying body beneath the Eared Tree. It is death made physical, a necrotic growth that creeps through the soil and corrupts the creatures and environments it contacts. The Tibia Mariner enemies you encounter carry boats full of Deathroot, and the Deathbirds that appear at night in various areas are creatures infected or created by the Deathroot's influence. D, the Hunter of the Dead, is tasked with tracking down and destroying Deathroot wherever it appears. He gives the Deathroot you collect to Gurank, the beast clergyman, who eats it. Gurank is a massive, violent creature who consumes Deathroot as a form of containment, attempting to prevent it from spreading. As you give him more Deathroot, he becomes increasingly destabilized until eventually he attacks you. The act of consuming death is changing him. Gurank's identity, if you have played through the game, is eventually revealed to be Malekith in a different form or state. The beast clergyman who consumes Deathroot in the Bestial Sanctum and the Black Blade boss who guards the Rune of Death in Farum Azula are the same being in different modes. This suggests that Malekith's guardianship of the Rune of Death and the beast clergyman's consumption of Deathroot are connected activities. He is the system for managing death in the lands between. He contains it, he guards it, and the strain of that responsibility is visible in both of his forms. Volcano Manor continued. The denizens of Volcano Manor deserve more attention than they often receive. Tanith is the most visible, a refined woman in black who manages the manor like a household rather than a cult. She sends you on assassination missions, targeting other Tarnished who are enemies of Rykard's agenda. Her composure is remarkable, given what she is doing and what she is devoted to. The other residents of Volcano Manor include Bernal, a Tarnished who is also working with Rykard's cause, and who eventually becomes an invader in the endgame. There is Patches, the recurring series trickster, who is at Volcano Manor entirely for his own reasons, and seems mildly annoyed by the cultish atmosphere. There is Dialos, who arrives looking for his missing servant and finds himself pulled into a community that is not what he expected. The manor's questline, if you follow it, eventually leads to Rykard's boss fight. After defeating Rykard, when you return to the manor, Tanith is in his chamber, eating his remains. The other members of the manor have largely gone, including Bernal turning against you. What remains is a ruined institution and one woman who cannot leave. The serpent symbolism in Elden Ring runs through several elements of the game. The serpent in Rykard's case is associated with blasphemy, with being outside the order. But serpents in the item descriptions also occasionally refer to things that exist outside time or outside conventional power structures. There is a ring of thematic meaning around the serpent as a symbol of the world outside the world, which fits Rykard's explicit goal of consuming the gods and the Golden Order. Margit's Shackle and the connections between areas. Margit's Shackle, an item you can use in the Margit fight, is described as something that can bind an Omen King. The item connects to the network of imprisonment that underlies the Golden Order. Morgott was chained and kept underground. The chains are not metaphorical. There were actual mechanisms of restraint used on the Omen children of Marika. The fact that you can find and use this shackle against Morgott is a quiet piece of cruelty the game does not draw attention to. You are using the instrument of his oppression against him. The thing that held him underground is the thing you use to briefly immobilize him in battle. The Golden Order's tools of control are also your combat tools. The game does not comment on this directly. It just makes it possible. This kind of embedded detail is one of the things that makes Elden Ring's world feel genuinely thought through. The connections between items and histories and characters are not always spelled out. They exist to be found, and when you find them, they add texture to the world that you would not have noticed otherwise. The Great Runes in detail. Each of the Great Runes in the game represents a specific concept that was once part of the Elden Ring's complete structure. They are not simply power boosts, they are ideas made physical. Let us go through the major ones. Radon's Great Rune enhances the power of all stats simultaneously. This fits with who Radon was, a being of overwhelming, balanced strength, someone who pushed everything to its limit. His Great Rune is the rune of total capability, the idea that a being can be great in all directions at once. Godric's Great Rune enhances all stats when activated by a rune arc. Godric grafted himself to become more, and his rune, the most basic of the Great Runes, reflects an ambition that outstripped the reality. It is the rune of wanting more, of reaching for greatness that does not come naturally. Rykard's Great Rune restores health when you kill an enemy. This fits his philosophy of consuming to grow. His rune is the rune of predation, of taking life to sustain yourself. Morgott's Great Rune raises maximum HP. Morgott, who survived alone and sustained the capital through sheer endurance, embodies this concept. His Great Rune is the rune of persistence, of outlasting. Mohg's Great Rune empowers phantoms in your world, the cooperative summoning mechanic. This is fascinating. Mohg's rune affects others who come into your world to help you. The rune of the Bloodlord, who wanted to build a dynasty with a stolen Empyrean, manifests as the enhancement of those who answer a call for aid. There is an irony in it. He wanted followers, and got a rune that creates a version of that. Melania's Great Rune, when active, causes all healing to function in a delayed way. Health regenerates slowly after taking damage. This is a perfect reflection of her existence. She regenerates, she heals herself when she strikes you. Her whole life has been a cycle of damage and recovery. Her Great Rune turns that experience into a mechanic. Ranni's Great Rune, if you can find it, it is very hidden, reduces maximum HP but enables a powerful revival effect. Ranni chose to sacrifice her physical wholeness to gain freedom. Her Great Rune does the same. It makes you weaker in conventional terms and gives you something entirely different in return. The Golden Order and its contradictions. The Golden Order was built on a set of principles that seem coherent on the surface. The Erd Tree is divine. The Elden Ring is the law. Those with grace are chosen. Those with the marks of the Crucible are cursed. Elden Lords lead and protect. The cycle continues, but the contradictions begin almost immediately when you look at it closely. Marika herself was a Numen from outside the lands between, meaning the founder of the Order was not originally part of it. Radagon, her other half, was once an enemy of the Carians and then married into them. The first Elden Lord, Godfrey, was exiled as soon as he was no longer useful. The omens born from the Crucible are products of the same primordial world the Erd Tree's roots connect to. The Order condemns the very thing its own tree is rooted in. Goldmask, an NPC you encounter in the game, has dedicated his life to studying the Golden Order's contradictions and trying to reform it. He stands in specific locations across the map, head raised toward the sky, in silent contemplation. Corin, a theologian NPC, is his voice, translating his gestures and silences into language. Goldmask is trying to understand the true nature of the Golden Order, and his conclusion, if you complete his questline and follow it to the right ending, is that the Elden Ring should be repaired and renewed rather than destroyed or replaced, but the Elden Ring as it should have been, without its fundamental contradictions. The Age of Order ending, which is tied to Goldmask's questline, is often interpreted as the most intellectually conservative ending. Restore the Elden Ring, fix what is broken, keep the Order, but make it truer to its own stated ideals. Whether this is optimistic or naive depends on whether you believe the Golden Order's stated ideals were ever achievable, given the Greater Will's actual relationship to the world. Sorcery, incantations, and the divide. The Lands Between has two major schools of magical practice, sorcery and incantations. They are not simply different flavors of magic. They represent fundamentally different relationships to power and to knowledge. Sorcery comes from glintstones, which are the crystallized forms of the stars. The logic of sorcery is that the stars contain knowledge, and that knowledge can be extracted, learned, and applied. Sorcerers use their intelligence and their understanding of fundamental principles to shape reality. This approach is associated with the Carians, the Academy of Raya Lucaria, and a kind of intellectual independence from the Greater Will. Incantations come from faith, which is the force that connects a person to the divine order. The logic of incantations is that power flows from relationship, from your standing with the Erd Tree, with the Golden Order, or with one of the other powers in the world. Incantations associated with the Golden Order require high faith. Incantations associated with the Frenzied Flame require high arcane. Incantations associated with the Crucible, the ancient Crucible incantations, require both. The divide between sorcerers and clerics in the Lands Between is not just aesthetic, it is political. The Academy's sorcerers exist somewhat in tension with the Golden Order's faith. Sorcery implies that you can understand and apply power yourself, without divine intermediary. Faith implies that power comes from devotion and relationship. These are genuinely different philosophies about the nature of authority and of the cosmos. The Elden Ring's full scope. Let us try to bring together the full picture of what the Elden Ring is and what its destruction and potential restoration means. The Elden Ring is not a simple artifact of power. It is the binding law of reality in the lands between. It determines what life is, what death is, what grace means, and who is included in and excluded from the divine order. Before the Elden Ring, the Crucible was the law. Everything was connected, fluid, and ungoverned. The Elden Ring drew lines. It said, these are the blessed, these are the cursed. This is life, this is death. This is in the system, this is outside it. Those lines served the greater will's interest in maintaining a stable, manageable world. They also created the hierarchies that led to the Omen imprisonments, the Albinoric persecution, the eternal cities being buried, and all the other violences of the Golden Order's history. Shattering the Elden Ring broke those lines. Not in the liberating way Marika may have hoped, but chaotically, violently. The demigods grabbed the pieces and used them to fight each other. The cycle broke. The Tarnished were called back to put it together again. And the question of what putting it together again means, what kind of law you want the world to operate under, is what the endings of the game are asking. Each ending is a different answer to that question. Restore and improve the Golden Order. Become a mad flame that burns all distinctions. Let Rani's stars chart a new course for the world. Give death back to those who were denied it. Curse everyone equally. Let the age of stars drift forever. None of these is clearly right. Each one is someone's answer to an impossible situation, and each one costs something. The Shard Bearers and the late game. The late game of Elden Ring, the sequence that takes you through Leyndell, Farum Azula, and the final confrontation, is structured as a stripping away. You have collected great runes. You have explored the world. You have met most of the people who matter. And now you are going to the centre of the system and either repairing it or breaking it further. The Ashen Capital, which is what Leyndell becomes after the Erd Tree burns, is one of the most visually stunning moments in the game. The Golden City buried under white ash. The Erd Tree's roots turn to grey. The bustle and conflict of the earlier version of the city now a silence. It is devastation rendered in monochrome, and it is somehow beautiful. The final approach to the Elden Ring involves passing through these spaces, and by the time you reach Marika's shattered form inside the Erd Tree, you have seen enough of the world to understand what she did and why. She is chained to the Erd Tree. Her power is gone. She is not the eternal queen anymore. She is a prisoner of the system she both built and destroyed. When you break her chains, she asks you to become the Elden Lord, and she does not seem certain about what she is asking. The fight with Radagon and the Elden Beast is the final confrontation, and it is deliberately two-part. Radagon, the half of Marika that tried to repair what she broke, fights you with golden light and desperate force. He is not a villain. He is a being trying to maintain something it cannot maintain anymore. And when he falls, the Elden Beast emerges from his body, or from the Erd Tree itself, and the final battle is between you and the embodied will of the greater will. The Elden Beast does not hate you. It does not understand the concept of hating you. It is maintaining its function against a threat to that function. You are the Tarnished who might restore the Elden Ring in a way that is not the greater will's way, or who might destroy it entirely. From the Elden Beast's perspective, both of those outcomes are the same threat. You are something that does not belong in the system, doing something the system did not authorize. And depending on which ending you choose, you are either giving the system a new shape, removing it entirely, or handing it to someone else entirely. The Shadow of the Erd Tree and Miquella's full story, the DLC to Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erd Tree, expands the world significantly, and particularly addresses Miquella's story in ways the base game only hinted at. In the DLC, you enter a shadow realm, a world that Miquella created using his own arm, which he shed along with his flesh to leave behind his body and his compassion. This shadow realm is his making, his vision of what the world could be. What you discover as you move through the shadow realm is that Miquella's plan was not what it appeared. He was not simply trying to become an adult or escape the Haligtree. He was trying to become a true god, not in the sense of being a vessel for an outer god, but in the sense of being a god entirely of his own making. And to do that, he needed to shed everything: his body, his feelings, his ambitions for others. The trail of crosses you find throughout the Shadow Realm are Miquella's discarded aspects. Each cross marks a place where he left something of himself behind: his love for Malenia, his compassion for the Albinaurics, his hope for the Haligtree. He gave up all of it, piece by piece, to become something purely singular. The followers in the Shadow Realm who worship Miquella are people who are genuinely helped by him. He charmed them, not in a manipulative sense initially, but through his genuine capacity to inspire devotion. His power of charm, which is an aspect of his divine nature, eventually became something he weaponized. He used it to gather followers for his purpose, and those followers followed him into the Shadow Realm and gave themselves to his cause. The final revelation of the DLC is that Miquella's goal was to call down Radan's soul, which had been freed from his body when you killed him, and have it reborn as his consort and his champion. Radan, in his pre-rock glory, was the greatest warrior of his age. Miquella wanted that power, that specific beloved person, reborn to serve his divinity. The boss fight at the end of the DLC is Radan reborn as promised consort Radan, enormous and golden and devastating, serving a Miquella who has shed everything that made him worth following. This is one of the darkest character arcs in the game. Miquella begins as someone genuinely motivated by love and compassion. He grows his sister a tree from his own flesh. He makes a needle to free Malenia. He builds a refuge for the forgotten. And then, faced with the impossible situation of his own nature and his eternal childhood and the world's chaos, he strips away everything good in himself to become something powerful enough to matter. He succeeds, and what succeeds is not anyone who would have recognized the person he used to be. The mystery of the Fell Omen continued. The term Fell Omen, which Margit uses as his disguise name, has more significance than it might initially seem. Fell has an archaic meaning related to fierceness or cruelty, but in the context of the game, it also connects to the Fell god, the deity of the fire giants. An omen who is described as Fell is one who has connections to both the Crucible Curse and the ancient enemy of the Erdtree. Morgoth's decision to disguise himself as Margit the Fell Omen, a mysterious vagabond rather than an imprisoned prince of the blood, is practical. He cannot reveal who he is because who he is would undermine his mission to defend the capital. A prince of the Erdtree, who is also an imprisoned omen, is a walking contradiction that no one in the capital would know how to handle. So he hides. But there is also something in the name Fell Omen that might be Morgoth's own judgment about himself. He has internalized the Golden Order's view of omens as cursed, as bad omens in the most literal sense, and he has accepted that his existence is a kind of warning or tragedy. He is the omen who nevertheless serves, the cursed who remains faithful, the fell thing that tries to be good. The name might be his self-assessment disguised as a road name. The Crucible Incantations and Lost History. The Crucible Incantations are among the oldest magic in the game, predating the Golden Order and drawing on the primordial state of the Crucible. They give you draconic aspects, ancient horns, scales, wings, a great tail. They look like the natural growths of an omen. They feel foreign and ancient in a world that has spent centuries declaring such things to be cursed. The existence of these incantations within the game's magic system is itself a small form of historical preservation. They should not exist under the Golden Order's values. They represent the thing the Order most wants to bury. And yet they do exist, preserved in hidden places and guarded by the Crucible Knights, who have not forgotten what they are. One reading of the Crucible Knights is that they are a relic of a time before the Golden Order imposed its values, a time when the aspects of the Crucible were not shameful but sacred. They serve the Erdtree now, or they did before the Shattering, but they do so as survivors of an older tradition, carrying inside themselves the memory of a world the Erdtree replaced rather than improved. The Crucible as the game's deepest theme. If you strip away all the individual stories and focus on the philosophical spine of Elden Ring, what you find is the Crucible. The primordial state of connection and fluidity is the thing the Golden Order most wanted to suppress, and it is also the thing that keeps breaking through. The Omens, the Crucible Knights, the Fire Giants who remember the Fell God, the Nox who wanted to reach the stars, Rani who wants to take the world beyond the influence of the greater will, the frenzied flame that wants to dissolve all distinctions. All of these are, in different ways, expressions of the Crucible's resistance to the Golden Order's insistence on fixed categories and fixed hierarchies. The Elden Ring drew lines. The Crucible says there should not be lines. The entire history of the lands between can be read as the struggle between an order imposed by an outside power and the older, deeper nature of the world that refuses to be permanently contained. What makes Elden Ring's handling of this theme effective is that neither side is presented as simply right. The Crucible's fluidity was not peaceful. It was not organized. It was simply older. The Golden Order brought real goods along with its injustices, safety from certain kinds of chaos, a framework within which civilization could develop. The tragedy is not that order is bad, but that this particular order was built on exclusions and suppressions that it could not sustain indefinitely. The lands between's geography as history. The geography of the lands between is itself a kind of history, and understanding what each region represents adds depth to exploring it. Limgrave, where you begin, is the westernmost region, the furthest from the Erdtree, the first place Tarnished arrive. It is already in a state of decline by the time you reach it. Godric has reduced it to rubble and grafted soldiers. Liurnia, the lake region, is the domain of Renala and the Academy. It is a place where water has risen over the old world, suggesting flooding, perhaps metaphorical. Magic and memory float in this place. Things are half submerged. The old Carian castles are still standing, but filled with hostile spirits. The Academy is locked from within. Caelid is catastrophe-made landscape. The scarlet rot does not just affect creatures and structures. It has changed the soil and sky. The red haze, the blighted plants, even the dogs in Caelid are infected and grotesque. It is what happens when an outer god's influence is allowed to spread unchecked. Caelid was farmland and plains once. Now it is a wound. The Altus Plateau and Mount Gelmir are approaches to the capital. The plateau is golden and elevated, with armies of Erdtree soldiers and a sense of official power. Mount Gelmir leads to Rykard's Volcano Manor, hidden in the volcanic landscape, everything underneath the surface of the plateau's order. Mountaintops of the Giants is desolation and cold, ancient, pre-Erdtree. The bones of the Fire Giants remain. The snowfield is unrelenting. This is the edge of the world, the place before civilization, and it is beautiful in its emptiness. The Haligtree and Elfell. The Haligtree is Miquella's gift to those the Golden Order rejected, and it shows in its design. It is a tree as complex and alive as the Erdtree but unfinished, growing without its creator, tended by Malenia and the Clean Rot Knights. Its people are Albinorics, those afflicted by rot, and those who came because they had nowhere else. What strikes you about the Haligtree is its tenderness. The Erdtree is vast and remote and impersonal. The halig tree was grown by one person for specific others. The scale is smaller, the care is more evident, and it is dying without Michaela. The rot has spread into it. The people tending it are fighting a losing battle. When you reach Melania at the tree's base, you are fighting someone who knows she is watching everything she loves fail. Elfell, the city within the halig tree, was built to be a sanctuary. When you walk through it, past its dying gardens and its rot-infected defenders, there is a quality of grief to the architecture. This was meant to be beautiful. It almost is, and it was not enough. The Lord's Well and the Fracture. The Fracture is a late-game mechanic and location that represents the deterioration of the Erd tree's influence as the game progresses. The Erd tree does not burn at the beginning of the game. It is golden and intact, unreachable. As you progress, the conditions for burning it are assembled, and when it finally burns, the ashen capital is what remains. There is something the game does quietly but consistently, which is to show you the cost of every step toward the ending. The fire giant that you need to kill to light the flame is already a prisoner. The flame itself, once lit, cannot be put out. The Erd tree burning is final. The ash that covers Lanedell afterward does not lift. Every choice in the endgame is irreversible, and the game makes sure you feel that. The round table hold disappears after certain events. Characters who were there are gone, either moved on or dead. The world you've been building through your quests is crystallizing into its final shape, and there is no going back to see the people you helped or the stories you participated in. The game ends, and the world becomes the ending you chose. NPCs and their fates. Let us spend time on some of the smaller NPC stories, because these are where a lot of the game's emotional weight actually lives. The big mysteries are fascinating, but the people are what make the world feel real. Blackguard Big Boggart sells shrimp and crab from a moat in Liurnia. He used to work with the Volcano Manor as a kidnapper, helping abduct people for Tanith's questlines, but he stopped. He seems to have genuinely turned away from that life, and he runs his little food stall with a gruff kind of warmth. His questline ends in violence, through no real choice you can prevent. He is killed by the Dunge Eater, who drains him of his grace. Boggart, who was trying to live simply and honestly, is taken out by the most nihilistic figure in the game. The game does not editorialize this, it just happens. Millicent is one of the most complete NPC arcs in the game. She is infected with the Scarlet Rot and is a descendant of Melania in some way, which connects her rot infection to something older than just disease. Gowry, the old man who sends you to help her, turns out to be a servant of Melania's scarlet aspect, and his interest in Millicent is complicated. Her questline takes her from a dying woman in Caelid to a warrior who has claimed her own life, and its most positive resolution has her removing the rot from herself and going on to something the player never sees. Alexander, the Iron Fist, the walking pot filled with warrior flesh, is the game's most purely joyful character. He gets stuck in the ground. He fights at every major battle he can reach. He is unreservedly enthusiastic about fighting and about life. His questline ends in an optional battle where he asks you to fight him at his best, so that his essence can become part of a stronger warrior. The fight is sad, but the request is not. He is ready. He has lived the way he wanted to live. Killing him is a gift he explicitly asked for. Seluvis, the sorcerer who works in Rani's service, is one of the game's more genuinely unpleasant characters. He is building puppets, dolls controlled by a potion he developed, and he tries to get you to give that potion to various NPCs, including Nephili. His questline reveals depths of cruelty and manipulation that Rani herself apparently was not fully aware of. He is a good reminder that not everyone working toward a potentially positive goal is themselves a good person. The minor mysteries of item descriptions. Elden Ring's item descriptions contain entire histories compressed into a few sentences. Let us go through some of the smaller ones The jar items related to Alexander and the living jar enemies suggest that jars are a form of vessel created to contain warriors who fill themselves with the flesh of the fallen. The living jars are not just monsters, they are participants in a tradition, accumulating the essence of fighters inside themselves to become stronger. Alexander is the most developed form of this, but every living jar you smash is a participant in the same practice. The deathbed smalls, the undergarment associated with fear, are described as worn by those who provide comfort to the dead. The description is simple, but the implication is complex. Fear's role as a deathbed companion is not purely spiritual, it is physical. She holds the dead. She lies with them. The item description suggests an intimacy to the role that the game's more surface-level interactions with her do not fully convey. The crucible axe and crucible tree talismans associated with the crucible aspects describe the primordial state in language that is clearly reverent rather than disgusted. The game's hidden reverence for the crucible, underneath the Golden Order's official condemnation of it, appears in details like this throughout. The Mogwin Dynasty. Mausoleum's items speak of an underground empire built entirely on devotion to the formless mother, a blood god that is presented in the lore as genuinely alien in its desires. The blood-soaked stone of the mausoleum, the blood scarabs that infest it, the rivers of blood-soaked soil, all point to an outer god that feeds on blood as literally as the greater will feeds on souls. The Elden Stars spell, one of the hardest spells to obtain in the game, has a description suggesting it represents the beginning of everything. The first incantation, the oldest prayer, the moment when the greater will reached down and touched the lands between. Using it in battle calls down golden stars from above, and the description connects it to ancient faith older than any formal religion. It is the sound of the world beginning, compressed into a combat spell. The Lake of Rot and the Rivers of Scarlet. The Lake of Rot in the Ainsel River underground area is one of the most striking environments in the game. An entire underground cavern flooded with liquid scarlet rot, lit by a sickly light that makes it look almost beautiful before you realise that stepping into it will kill you in seconds. The ruins beneath the lake suggest that something was here before the rot came. A civilization, or at least a settlement, now lost under the red water. The progression of the rot from Malenia's body outward into the world is visible in how the rot appears in different areas. In Caelid it is concentrated and devastating. In the Halig tree it is spreading but being fought. In the underground it has found a low place to pool, far from anything that might stop it. The Lake of Rot represents what happens when the outer god of Rot finds an environment with no opposition. Near the Lake of Rot you find Astel, natural born of the Void, a boss that is completely different from everything else in the underground. Astel appears to be something cosmic, insectile, and vast, covered in stars. It is described as a meteorite that fell from outer space and hollowed out the eternal cities. It is a piece of the world beyond the stars that fell into the lands between and found the underground. Astel's presence near the Lake of Rot may be coincidental, or it may suggest that the outer space and the outer god of Rot have some connection. The underground is a place where multiple alien influences have pooled. The buried cities of the Nox, the Lake of Rot, Astel fallen from the stars, the three fingers at the bottom of everything. The underground is the accumulation of everything the surface world tried to push away. The Ainsel River and the story of a small girl. In the Ainsel River, a region accessible through a miniature sort of sending gate from Rani's Rise, you can find a small doll that speaks in a child's voice. This doll is Rani herself, in her smaller, more vulnerable form, different from the large doll she usually inhabits. She asks you to follow her through the underground, fighting enemies and exploring. The Ainsel River questline, Rani's questline essentially, requires you to defeat an enemy called the Baleful Shadow, which is an assassin sent by the Two Fingers to kill Ranni. The Two Fingers want Ranni dead. She rejected her Empyrean status. She's been hiding from them for centuries, and they have not stopped looking for her. When you protect Ranni from the baleful shadow and recover an item from the depths of the underground, she reveals enough of her true self to make the questline feel personal rather than procedural. She is grateful. She is also still controlled and careful. She does not show vulnerability easily, but there is a warmth in her interactions during this questline that contrasts with the cold witchiness she projects at other times. The miniature doll she inhabits for this section is a detail worth noticing. Ranni's primary doll is large and imposing, with 4 arms and a dress of stars. This secondary doll is tiny and fragile. It suggests that she does not always have the resources to maintain the impressive facade. Sometimes she is just a very small, very alone person in a doll, trying to stay alive long enough to finish something she started a long time ago. Patches. No extended Elden Ring lore discussion is complete without Patches. Patches is a recurring character in From Software games, always a merchant and a trickster, always betraying the player at least once, always surviving everything through a combination of cowardice and luck. In Elden Ring, Patches tries to kill you in the Murkwater Cave by locking you in and summoning enemies. When you confront him, he surrenders and claims he did not know you were tarnished with such quality about you, such clearly superior grace, such an obviously distinguished bearing. He is flattering you openly and obviously, and then he becomes a merchant. He later appears in Liurnia with a merchant's caravan, and then at Volcano Manor, where he is clearly only there for his own reasons. He sells you the location of a rare item at significant cost, and the item turns out to be in a chest that transports you to a dangerous location. He does this multiple times across different games. He has been doing it for a long time. Patches represents something the game seems to enjoy. Not every person in this world is caught up in the cosmic tragedy of the Elden Ring and the Outer Gods. Some people are just trying to make money and not die. Patches is phenomenally good at not dying. He has no great rune. He has no divine mission. He has a smile and a convincing manner and an instinct for when to run. In a game full of doomed characters, Patches is the one who might actually be okay. Bock the Seamster. Bock is one of the most purely emotional NPC questlines in the game. He is a demi-human, which means he is half human and covered in fur, with large eyes and a small body. He was transformed into a tree by his demi-human brothers, who were jealous of him, and you free him by striking the tree with a whip-like weapon. He immediately becomes devoted to you. His dream is to be a seamster, to alter clothes and make them beautiful. He has a genuine talent for it, and as you progress his questline, he becomes better and better at it. His problem is that he also hates what he is. He does not want to be a demi-human. He wants to look like a person, a proper person, not the creature he was born as. This wish causes him to seek out a larval tear, which would allow him to be reborn in a different form. And if you do not intervene, he uses it and dies from the process. The intervention available to you is to tell him he is beautiful as he is. The specific item you give him, a gold sewing needle or a word of genuine affirmation, is enough to dissuade him from the dangerous rebirth. The game is pointing at something in this. Not that all dissatisfaction with yourself is misguided, but that sometimes the desire to be something different comes from other people's cruelty rather than from a genuine need for change. Bock's brothers told him he was not enough. The Golden Order society around him told him he was not human enough. None of that was true. The twin bird and cycles of death. The twin bird is one of the stranger enemies in the game, a creature that appears in specific locations at night or under certain conditions. It is a bird, but it carries something strange. Its lore connects it to the Ear Tree's cycle of death and rebirth, specifically to the idea that the twin bird is sent by the Erd tree to claim the essence of those who die in specific ways. It is a collector, a made thing in service of the cycle. The connection between the death birds, which are infected by deathroot, and the twin bird, which serves the Erd tree's cycle, points to a tension in the underground network of death management. The death birds are things that have been corrupted by Godwin's influence, spreading through the roots. The twin bird is still clean, still serving the original function. They are the same kind of creature in different states, which suggests that the Erd tree's management of the death cycle was always done through these bird intermediaries, and that the corrupted versions are what happens when that management system gets infected at the source. The sleeping giants and the mountaintops. The mountaintops of the giants are covered in the bones and bodies of the fire giants, who were killed or imprisoned by Marika's campaign. But there are also things in the snow that suggest something still older, pre-giant, pre-Erd tree. The ruined churches scattered across the mountaintops, dedicated to Marika, but clearly very old, suggest that even the mountaintops were once part of a broader religious geography. Borealis, the freezing fog, is a dragon that inhabits the mountaintops, and it is ancient even by dragon standards. Its presence there, in the same region as the fire giants, suggests a time when dragons and giants coexisted in the cold places of the world, before either the Dragon Wars or Marika's campaigns against the giants. The divine towers scattered across the lands. Between also have a presence in this region. The divine tower of the mountaintops allows you to restore the great rune of the shard-bearer you defeat there, and they connect to a network of towers that spread across the entire continent, each one an antenna for the Elden Ring's power. The towers were presumably part of the original construction of the Golden Order's infrastructure, and their placement across every major region suggests the scope of what Marika and the Greater Will built. This was not a small thing. This was a complete restructuring of how an entire world worked. Preserving grace, and what it means to be tarnished. The status of being tarnished is complicated by what we know about grace. To be tarnished means you once had grace and lost it, but the loss of grace does not mean the loss of something inherently good. In the Golden Order's system, grace is a mark of divine approval. To lose it is to be exiled. But the game repeatedly shows that grace is not a morality system. Tarnished who have returned can be noble or monstrous. NPCs who never lost their grace can be cruel. The Golden Order's chosen people included Morgoth's jailers, the soldiers who hunted Albinorix, and the scholars who betrayed Renala. Grace measures something, but what it measures is connection to the Greater Will system, not goodness. This is made explicit by the fact that you, as the player character, are guided not by the Erd tree's grace, but by a different kind, the golden guidance that comes from somewhere outside the established system. Whatever is calling you back is making a different kind of choice than the two fingers are making. It is choosing you based on something other than your submission to the Golden Order. The ending you choose crystallizes this. The tarnished who becomes Elden Lord is someone who is outside the system, came back in, fought through everything the system could throw at them, and then rewrote the rules. The question of what rules are better and whether the rewriting was worth what it cost is what you're left holding at the end of the game. The full scope of NPC interweaving. One of the things that makes Elden Ring's NPC stories feel rich is how they connect to each other in ways that are not always announced. Ranni's questline involves not just her, but Blard, Seluvis, E.g. Selen, Rogier and you. Each of these characters has their own agenda, their own history, and their own role in what Ranni is doing, and each of them ends differently depending on which choices you make and in what order. Rogier is a scholar who became interested in Godwin's death and the Black Knife assassins. His investigation leads him down into the Stormvale basement, where Godwin's body is visible, growing through the floor. Encountering it leaves him marked, infected in a small way, by the Prince of Death. He eventually dies from it, quietly, sitting in the round table hold. He figures out a great deal of what happened on the night of Black Knives and shares it with you if you talk to him carefully. E.g., Rani's other guardian alongside Blad is a war counsellor who has been protecting Rani for centuries. He is the adult presence in a circle of people who are all in different ways damaged or compromised. He watches over Blad's deterioration with grief. He maintains the illusion of normalcy at Three Sisters. After Rani's questline concludes, he can be found dead, killed by the same assassins who were hunting Rani. He did not escape, he just made sure the escape happened. Blade is perhaps the saddest of Rani's companions. He is a half-wolf, literally half-man, half-wolf, and he was assigned to Rani as her shadow by the Two Fingers. This means the Two Fingers put someone who would fall completely in love with Rani's cause next to her, with the expectation that they could use him to control or report on her. Blad did fall in love with Rani's cause. He also became genuinely her friend, and when his shadow function, the part of him that was supposed to report to the Two Fingers, tried to assert itself, he fought it. He kept fighting it. He almost won. But the drive to betray her that was built into him could not be completely overcome, and when Rani's questline concludes, you find him in front of her tower, finally lost to the shadow, attacking everything. He dies fighting. He would have wanted that, probably. Not the losing, but the fighting. The Three Sisters and the gravity of the place Caria Manor and the Three Sisters. The area north of Liurnia has a quality to it, unlike most of the game. It is nighttime in a way that feels permanent. The stars are too bright. Rani's tower, Renala's tower, the third tower, they stand in a row as if arranged by someone with a deliberate mind. The lakes and falls of Liurnia below feel very far away. The three towers belong to Three Sisters, and the specific names and details of what each tower represents are not fully spelled out. Rani's tower is the one you explore in her questline. The other towers house challenges and items, but the fact that there are Three Sisters, three towers, three aspects of what the Carian royal family represented, suggests a structure that was carefully designed. The lunar estate, Renna's Rise, is the tower you eventually unlock access to for Rani's quest, and it contains a sending gate that leads to the Ainsel River. It is named after a person who may be an older name for Rani, or a different aspect of the same being. Renna versus Rani. The question of whether they are the same person is connected to the larger question of how much of who Rani is was erased along with her original body. The stargazing quality of Three Sisters. The way the stars are so visible, the way the sky feels closer there than anywhere else in the game, connects to the Carian love of celestial magic and to Rani's ambition to take the world to the stars. She has been looking up for a very long time, the prisoner set and those condemned by the Golden Order. Throughout the game you encounter various forms of imprisonment, the shunning grounds for omens, the underground cities, individual cells in Stormvale, strangely positioned cages in Caelid. The prison itself is a major architecture of the lands between, which suggests that the Golden Order's civilization was built in significant part on the containment of those it could not accommodate. The prisoner set is one of the starting armor options, and it presents a character in a cage bolted to their head. The lore around it suggests someone who was imprisoned for their power, specifically sorcery, by the Academy. Sorcerers who were considered too dangerous were caged rather than killed, their minds restrained while their bodies remained. It is a particularly cruel form of imprisonment, denying both freedom and the mercy of death. The question of who exactly the prisoner was and what they did to earn that fate is left open, as it is with most of the game's background characters. They existed. They were punished. Their punishment outlasted whatever system imprisoned them. The cage is still there when you find it. That is all the game tells you, and in this case, that is enough. The Tarnished's journey as history being made. You are not just a player character moving through a world, You are a historical agent. By the time you finish the game, you will have killed every major shard-bearer, broken the Erdtree's seal, and chosen the shape of a new age. Your journey through the lands between is the most consequential event in its history since the Shattering, maybe since the Golden Order was established. This weight is mostly implicit. The game does not constantly tell you how important you are, but the world responds. Characters' questlines conclude. The Erdtree changes, the capital becomes ash, the sky looks different after certain events. Your presence is reshaping history in real time, and the feeling of that, of walking through a world that is changing because of what you are doing, is one of the things Elden Ring does better than almost any other game. The somber quality of the late game is partly visual and partly narrative. The late game is darker. The enemies are more desperate. The NPC interactions have a quality of conclusion. Everyone is at their end state, for better or worse, and you are the one who brought them there, not maliciously, but inevitably, as the agent of whatever change the world needed, the unnamed tarnished and the continuity of identity. You are never given a name. Your character is defined entirely by what you do and which choices you make. This is standard for From Software games, but in Elden Ring it has a specific meaning. You are a vessel, just as Marika was a vessel, just as the Empyreans are vessels. The difference is that you are a vessel for your own choices rather than for an outer god's agenda. Or are you? The question of whether the Tarnished is truly free, or whether they are following a script written by Marika, by the Greater Will, by Rani, by some combination of forces that has set up all these options, specifically to produce the outcome that was always intended, is one the game does not answer. The guidance that brought you there exists for a reason. The grace that marks you as chosen was given by something with an agenda. Even your freedom might be a managed freedom, a set of choices presented within a range that someone else selected. This does not make the choices meaningless. Even within a constrained set of options, which one you pick reflects something about who you are. But it adds a layer of ambiguity to every ending you chose. But you chose from among options that were laid before you. Whether that counts as freedom depends on what you think freedom means, which is, appropriately for Elden Ring, a question the game raises and does not answer. The great tree and the question of what comes next. Every ending shows you a brief vision of what the world becomes after your choice. The Golden Order restored, with a new Elden Lord. The Age of Stars, with the lands between drifting toward the cosmos. The Age of Duskborn, with a gentle death given to all who deserve it. The blessing of despair, with the world equally cursed. The Lord of Frenzied Flame, with everything burning. The mending of the Elden Ring, if you use a specific mending rune, correcting one of its specific flaws. None of these endings show you more than a moment, a symbolic image. The game does not tell you whether the Elden Lord you become rules wisely. It does not tell you whether Rani's Age of Stars produces the liberation she hoped for. It does not tell you whether the frenzied flames burning creates the undifferentiated warmth that Hyetta described. It gives you a choice and then takes you to the threshold of its consequences without crossing it. This is the appropriate ending for a game about mystery. The mysteries are not all solved. The world continues beyond what you can see. The lands between will keep being the lands between, with whatever age you have inaugurated, and the people who survive your arrival will live in that age and tell stories about what happened. And those stories will probably not fully agree with each other, because that is the nature of the world Miyazaki and Martin built. The truth is always fragmentary, the history is always contested, and the work of understanding it is never complete. The Tarnished leaves the Erdtree, the age begins, the world continues, the final mysteries still unanswered. There are things about Elden Ring that remain genuinely unanswered even after extensive theorizing. The identity of Melina. The full nature of the greater will's motivations. What happened to the god that Placidusax served? What Michela's plan would have produced if he had succeeded? Whether Marika is truly imprisoned or has been waiting for exactly what happens. The game's director, Hidetaka Miyazaki, has spoken about how he enjoys leaving certain things deliberately ambiguous, not because the answers do not exist, but because the space left by the unanswered question is itself meaningful. The question changes you. The searching changes you. Finding a partial answer and having to sit with the incompleteness is part of what the game is. Whether that is satisfying depends on the player. Some people find it frustrating. They want the definitive explanation. They want the lore video that tells them what actually happened. And those videos are out there, and they're useful, and they serve a genuine need. But at some level, Elden Ring resists being fully explained. Not because it was carelessly constructed, but because it was deliberately constructed to resist. The Lands Between is a place built to be partially known and partially mysterious, and that partial mystery is what makes it feel like a real world rather than a story. Real worlds have gaps. They have events that happened before the surviving documents were written. They have figures whose motivations were never recorded. They have contradictions that no one resolved because the people who could have resolved them died before they got the chance. Elden Ring has all of these, and that is why its world continues to feel alive, even after you have spent hundreds of hours in it. The Crucible's return in every ending. Every ending of the game involves, in some form, the partial restoration of the Crucible's principle. Even the Golden Order restoration involves a tarnished, someone outside the system, rewriting the rules from inside. Even the Frenzied Flame ending involves a total dissolution of the lines the Elden Ring drew. The Crucible cannot be permanently suppressed. The connection between all things that predates the Elden Ring finds its way back in every direction the world can go. This is the deepest reading of Elden Ring's themes. Order is not permanent. The lines drawn by any system, however powerful, are drawn in something that can be erased. The Crucible was the world before the lines were drawn, and the Crucible is the world after the lines are erased. The Elden Ring gave the Lands Between a particular kind of life, but life itself, the raw fact of it, the crucible from which all living things emerged, that predates the Elden Ring and will outlast whatever replaces it. In that sense, the Lands Between is resilient in a way that none of its inhabitants fully appreciate. It has survived the primordial crucible, the establishment of the Golden Order, the shattering, the demigod wars, the burning of the Erd Tree, and now your arrival and your choice. It will survive what comes next. The world keeps going. The mystery deepens. And somewhere in it, the roots of a new age are already growing. Continue from where you left off no matter what. 1:28 p.m. Resumed narrative expansion on established lore content. Resumed narrative expansion on established lore content. The Cleanrot Knights and Malenia's Loyal. The Cleanrot Knights are among the most tragic of the game's non-boss enemies. They were the elite guard of Malenia, devoted to her personally rather than to any institution or order. They followed her into the Battle of Ionia, and they were there when she bloomed. Many of them were infected by the scarlet rot in that moment, and yet they stayed. They continued to serve her. They escorted her sealed flower form back to the Halig Tree and have been protecting her ever since. The armour of the Cleanrot Knights reflects this duality. It is ceremonial and precise, the armour of an elite order, but it is also visibly affected by the rot. There are aspects of their equipment that have been modified to accommodate the infection, rather than deny it. These are knights who looked at what happened to them and to their lord, and chose to keep going. Not out of blind loyalty, but out of genuine devotion to someone who, by all accounts, deserved it. Finley is the most notable individual among them. Lore from specific armour descriptions tells a story of extraordinary dedication. After Malenia collapsed following the battle, It was Finley who carried her alone through enemy-controlled territory back to the Halig tree. She fought off clean rot enemies who had already been consumed by the rot, carried her commander's sealed form on her back, and made it home. No one asked her to. There was no order from above. She simply did it because Melania was hers to protect and she protected her. You never meet Finley as a living NPC. She died before the events of the game. But the armor description tells you everything. In a game full of grand cosmic struggles between outer gods and demigods, Finley's story is about a soldier who carried someone home. The nomadic merchants and the forgotten people? The nomadic merchants are figures you encounter throughout the lands between, always sitting by small fires, always alone, always willing to trade. They hum a recognizable melody that you hear from one to the next. They are scattered across every region, and they are, according to their lore, members of a people who were once united and are now dispersed. The merchants were a travelling people, and they carried the sum of their culture with them on the road. At some point, their culture was deemed a threat to the Golden Order. Their accumulated knowledge, their songs, their traditions were considered dangerous. They were not killed exactly, but they were forbidden from gathering. The merchants were scattered, their community deliberately fragmented, and left to wander alone, carrying the remnants of their culture in the songs they still hum. The song they hum to themselves is a mourning song. It is a song for what they lost. The item that holds the most lore about them, a specific bell bearing found on a dead merchant, reveals the outline of this history, that they were once more than wandering traders, that they had a world that was taken from them, and that the humming is their way of still being connected to each other and to that world even in separation. When you kill a nomadic merchant, as the game sometimes requires for progression or for drops, there is a specific and uncomfortable quality to it. These are not enemies. They are survivors of a cultural erasure, sitting alone by fires, selling you things, humming quietly. The Golden Order's violence does not only appear in the grand form of armies and imprisonments, it appears in small, persistent, everyday ways too, in people who are scattered and can no longer come together. Edgar and Irina are a father and daughter whose questline is one of the shorter and more linear in the game, but it carries weight precisely because of its simplicity. Irina is blind and sits near the Bridge of Sacrifice in Limgrave, the bridge you need to cross to reach Weeping Peninsula. She is trying to send a letter to her father, Edgar, who is defending Castle Morn against a monster incursion. Castle Morn has been overwhelmed. The soldiers tasked with defending it have turned against its people due to influence from the crucible weapons they were given. Edgar is still inside, holding on, waiting for orders that will never come from a command structure that no longer exists. When you bring him Irina's letter, he reads it and decides to stay and finish his duty first. He will come to his daughter after. When you return to Irina, she is dead. She was killed by the stragglers from Castle Morn, who reached the road. Edgar arrives shortly after, finds his daughter's body, and breaks. His grief is immediate and physical, and then something in him converts. He picks up his weapon and announces he is going to find whoever did this. Edgar, as an invader, can appear later, hunting you. The game implies he has become a revenger, pursuing violence as the only response to grief left to him. He is not a villain. He is a man who loved his daughter and arrived too late and has nothing left but the motion of pursuit. His invasion of your world is almost an accident. He is moving because stopping means feeling what he feels. The game does not punish him with a dramatic end. It just lets him exist in his grief and keeps going. The Nomads of the Great Jar. The Great Jar in Caelid is one of the game's more cryptic optional challenges. It is a massive living jar, taller than a building, silent, sitting in a ruin in the middle of Caelid. Around it are smaller jars. To receive a reward from the Great Jar, you must win 3 consecutive invasions of other players summoned by the smaller jars. No explanation is given. No context is provided. The Great Jar does not speak. The reward you receive, the Great Jar's Arsenal Talisman, increases your equipment load significantly, which is a practical benefit. But the lore around living jars and the specific image of the Great Jar presiding over its smaller subjects suggests something else. The Great Jar may be a figure of authority in the jar community, a patriarch or an ancestor vessel filled with the essence of many warriors. The ritual of invasions might be a test the Great Jar requires before granting access to what it contains. Everything about this is speculation, but it is the kind of speculation the game invites. The Great Jar has no dialogue and no item description explaining itself. Its silence is the mystery. Whatever it is, whatever it wants, it made its conditions clear in the only way it apparently communicates, by having smaller jars challenge you on its behalf. The jars are not aggressive. They are testing you, and the Great Jar, immobile and enormous, waits for the result. The Haligdrake and the nature of holy protection. The Haligdrake talismans and the various holy resistance items in the game point toward a system of protection against the Erd Tree's own power. Holy damage in Elden Ring is the magic of the Erd Tree and the Golden Order, and while it is effective against undead and those touched by death, it is possible for a player to need protection from it. Which raises a question. Why would protection from holy power exist within the Golden Order's world? One answer is that holy damage was always dual purpose. The same power that purifies the undead can also burn the living. The Golden Order created weapons capable of using this force, and so armor and talismans that protect against it were a practical necessity for soldiers who might be caught in the crossfire of holy spellcasting. But there is another reading. The existence of Haligdrake scales, which are specifically dragon-derived protections against holy damage, suggests that the ancient dragons had methods of resisting the Erd Tree's power. This fits with the history of tension between the dragons and the Golden Order. The dragons were a force that existed before the Elden Ring was established, and they had their own relationship with divinity. Their scales, their natural armour, may have been part of what made them resistant to the power the Greater Will brought to the lands between. The glintstone crowns and the sorcerer's hierarchy, the various glintstone crowns available in the game, each represent different schools or philosophical positions within the Academy of Raya Lucaria. The Twin Sage glintstone crown enhances sorcery at the cost of stamina and health. The Olivinus crown connects to a specific tradition of crystalline research. The astrologer set suggests an older tradition of reading the stars for magical guidance rather than the more rigorous academic approach of the later academy. The sorcery community in the lands between is not monolithic. There are disagreements about method, about ethics, about what kind of research is acceptable. The crystalline sorceries that require specific staffs suggest a sub-tradition that deviated from conventional academy teaching. The moon sorceries of the Kyrians are explicitly distinct from academy sorcery and are viewed somewhat condescendingly by academy scholars who see their own work as more rigorous. Selen's questline makes this internal conflict explicit. Selen was a master sorceress who was expelled from the academy for conducting research involving the souls of people, specifically research into what the item descriptions call primal glintstone, which is effectively the soulstone form of a living being. She was branded a witch and exiled. Her research was considered a violation of the Academy's ethics, which is interesting given that the Academy's ethics were themselves not rigorous by any external standard. The outcome of Selen's questline involves her either taking control of the Academy and transforming herself into something beyond human, or being defeated and reduced to a moaning sphere of flesh. Both outcomes are disturbing. Selen's research pushed into territory the Academy was not ready for, and the consequences reflect that. She found something real, What it cost her was everything she was. Miriam and the invasion tradition. In Liurnia, in the ruins that dot the lake, you can find Miriam, a character who invades your world at specific points as you climb through certain ruins. She does not speak to you. She is simply there, hostile, and then gone when you defeat her or she defeats you. Her armor and weapon identify her as a sorceress of some tradition. The lore around her suggests she is a spirit, not a living invader. She was someone who died defending the ruins, or perhaps someone whose essence is still bound to them in the aftermath of the shattering. Her invasions are more like hauntings than attacks. She returns each time you reach the right point in her territory, because she's unable to stop returning. Whatever killed her did not release her from her post. Miriam is a minor character in the scope of the game, but she represents a category of presence in the lands between that is easy to overlook. Many of the hostile presences you encounter are not actively malicious. They are trapped. They are echoing a past action in a loop they cannot escape. The invasion system, mechanically a player versus player framework, is narratively a haunting system. The world of the lands between is full of the unfinished business of dead people who have not found their way out of the moment of their death. The remembrances and the nature of legacy. When you defeat a major boss in Elden Ring, you receive a remembrance. These items, when taken to Anya at the Round Table Hold, can be exchanged for weapons, spells, or ashes of war that embody the defeated boss's essence. The mechanical purpose is clear, but the narrative logic of the remembrance is interesting. A remembrance is described as the accumulated experiences and power of a being, compressed into a single item at the moment of their death. It is their legacy made physical. When you exchange it for a weapon, you are not just receiving power, you are receiving the specific form of power that defined who that person was. Melinia's remembrance can give you her blade or her Scarlet Ionia incantation. Both of those are aspects of who Melinia was. Her blade represents her craft, her Ionia represents the terrible bloom. You are choosing which part of her to carry forward. This gives a specific weight to the choice of what to do with remembrances. You could sell them for runes, you could duplicate them at walking mausoleums and get both rewards, or you could choose carefully based on what each remembrance represents and what you want to carry. The game does not force this interpretation on you, but it is available, and once you see it, the remembrances become a small way of engaging with the question of legacy. What do you remember about someone? What do you keep? The walking mausoleums themselves. The walking mausoleums are enormous walking structures, stone buildings on massive insect-like legs, wandering certain areas of the lands between. They are ancient. Their origin is not clearly explained. Inside each one, you can duplicate a remembrance. The lore around them connects them to the death system, to the preservation of the memory of the dead. They walk because a stationary mausoleum can be found and destroyed. A walking one is harder to target, harder to reach, and harder to stop. They are moving monuments, preserving what they contain by never staying in one place long enough to be vulnerable. The specific creatures that travel with the walking mausoleums, the small creatures that cling to them and that you must kill to stop them temporarily, suggest that the mausoleums were maintained by keepers, caretakers, who lived with the monument and kept it moving. In the current age, after the shattering, those keepers are gone or have become the small hostile creatures attached to the structure. Even the caretakers of memory have been reduced to echoes. The Stormhawk and the Lord of Storms. Godric the Grafted's connection to storm magic is not incidental. Stormvale Castle is built on and around a site of storm power, and the storm-calling abilities that Godfrey, Nephili, and Godric all use suggest a lineage-linked magic that belongs to the Godfrey bloodline. The Stormhawk Dinash of War summons a hawk of wind and storm, which was historically the companion of the lords who ruled Stormvale. The storm imagery connected to Godfrey and his descendants is worth reading carefully. Storm is turbulent, powerful, and directional. It goes where it goes, and nothing stops it. Godfrey was exactly that kind of force. Nephili inherits the magic, but uses it more deliberately, more controlled. Godric had access to the same lineage, but could not make it his own, which is why the grafting became his answer. He tried to compensate for the storm he could not summon with the body parts of those who could fight. The storm is also connected to the word fell in an older sense. Storms fell to ancient peoples, powerful and ominous. The connection between Morgoth calling himself Margit the Fell Omen and the storm-linked heritage of Godfrey's bloodline might be reaching too far. But the game builds in enough layers that it is at least worth noting that Fell, Storm, and the Godfrey bloodline all cluster around the same geographic and familial region. The Red Wolf of Radagon, one of the earlier major encounters in the Academy of Raya Lucaria, is the Red Wolf of Radagon, a large red wolf that fights with magic and serves as the gateway to Renala's chamber. The wolf is described as a manifestation of Radagon's red-haired visage, which is itself a curious piece of lore. Radagon had red hair. His red hair was considered unusual and significant, and certain item descriptions connect his specific colouring to his unusual nature as both himself and Marika. The red wolf is not Radagon. It is something that formed from his presence in the Academy, from his time there with Renala. It carries his essence but is not him. It is a kind of psychic residue, a shape the world took because Radagon was there and was important enough to leave a mark. This kind of residue appears elsewhere in the game. The magical signatures left by powerful figures who spent time in a place. The crucible traces that linger in locations where crucible-connected events happened. The world of the lands between has a kind of memory, and the echoes of powerful people appear in its environments, long after those people have moved on or died. The Academy still holds Radagon's echo in the form of a red wolf, and that echo still protects the way to the woman he loved and left. The crucible and the grafted enemies. The grafted scion, which is the enemy you encounter at the very beginning of the game in what is effectively a tutorial death, is a creature made of human parts. Arms, torsos, faces, all fused together into a many-limbed horror. It is the extreme form of what Godric does to his soldiers, the end point of the grafting philosophy taken to its logical conclusion. The grafted sign appears in the tutorial area alongside the message that these are the remains of champions past, meaning it is assembled from the bodies of tarnished who came before you and failed. It is a monument to failure, a practical use of discarded bodies and a statement about what the game expects from you before you've learned what you're doing. The connection to Godric is direct. Godric created the grafted scions. His philosophy of accumulation, of taking strength from others because your own is insufficient, produced this creature. And it is the first thing you fight in the game. Before you have any skills or stats or equipment worth speaking of, you are expected to lose. Most players do. And then they wake up, weaponless in a cemetery, and start again. Starting again is what Tarnished do. The death at the beginning of the game is not a failure state. It is an introduction to the mechanic that defines your existence. You die and you continue, over and over, until you do not. The Deacons of the Deep and the echoes of other games. Elden Ring exists in a world that is related to but distinct from the Dark Souls universe. There are resonances, things that feel familiar, the concept of the undying, of a cycle of death and rebirth overseen by some greater power, of civilizations built on divine authority that eventually crumble. The Deacons of the Deep from Dark Souls 3 become echoed in the Elden Ring enemies, who are dedicated to something they do not fully understand, clustered around a power that has consumed the thing they were supposed to serve. Miyazaki returns to similar themes because the themes are genuinely inexhaustible. The question of what obligation a god has to its people, and what obligation a people has to a god that may not deserve it. The question of whether order is worth what it costs. The question of what remains when the center does not hold. These are questions that can be explored from different angles indefinitely, and each game in the Soulsborne tradition approaches them from a slightly different position. Elden Ring's distinctive contribution is scale and collaboration. The lands between is enormous, and its lore is distributed across that enormousness in a way that lets different players encounter entirely different aspects of the world and come away with entirely different understandings of what happened. Two people can finish Elden Ring and disagree completely about Marika's motives, about whether Ranni's ending is hopeful or tragic, about what the frenzied flame actually represents. The game is large enough to contain those disagreements. The Cuckoo Knights and Raya Lucaria's military. The Cuckoo Knights are the military force of the Academy of Raya Lucaria, and their name is unusual enough to be worth examining. A cuckoo bird lays its eggs in other birds' nests and lets those birds raise its young. The cuckoo's survival strategy is infiltration and substitution. The knights who serve under the cuckoo banner were not originally from Raya Lucaria. The Academy recruited soldiers from elsewhere, from Liurnia's common population, from former Golden Order forces, from wherever it could find trained fighters who did not object to serving sorcerers. They are the Academy's borrowed military, fighting under a banner that refers explicitly to that borrowed nature. The name is self-aware in a way that is unusual for a military order. After the shattering, the Cuckoo Knights largely turned against Renala when she withdrew into grief. They joined the faction of scholars who tried to take over the Academy. When you fight your way through Raya Lucaria, most of the soldiers you face are Cuckoo Knights, who chose institutional loyalty over personal loyalty to the woman who led the institution. Whether that makes them practical or treacherous depends on what you think their obligation was. The surviving Cuckoo Knight spirits, summoned through their ashes, fight alongside you in a purely practical arrangement. Whatever their politics in life, in death they are weapons. The game does not moralize about this. The dead serve the living. It is a rule of the lands between that applies to soldiers as much as to anyone else. The bell bearings and what they represent. Throughout the game, you find bell bearings, items that can be given to the twin maiden husks at the Round Table Hold to unlock their shop inventory. Each bell bearing comes from a specific source, a dead merchant, a defeated boss, a hidden location, and each one represents something that was once alive and is now incorporated into the service of those who remain. The twin maiden husks themselves are a mystery. They are described as the remains of two finger maidens who accompanied a tarnished champion before you. That champion died. The finger maidens remained. They became the shopkeepers of the Round Table Hold, still serving, their individual identities dissolved into a single, functional presence behind a counter. The bell-bearing system, taken as a whole, is another way the game embeds its themes into its mechanics. Resources flow from the dead to the living. The accumulated goods of those who came before are passed on to those who come after. The merchants who are killed or who die naturally have their stocks absorbed into the larger economy of the hold. The system does not grieve its sources, it simply uses them. Sorcerer Rogier, and what he knows Rogier, is one of the more thoughtful NPCs in the game. A man who approaches the world with scholarly curiosity rather than warrior instinct. He is a sorcerer, but his interests are more historical and investigative than academic. He wants to understand what happened, not to gain power from it, but because understanding matters to him. His investigation into the Knight of Black Knives leads him to discover Godwyn's body beneath Stormvale, and that discovery marks him. The contact with the Prince of Death's influence leaves something in him a kind of slow infection that does not express itself dramatically, but simply drains him over time. He continues anyway. Rogier is among the few NPCs who figures out a substantial part of what actually happened on the Night of Black Knives without divine guidance or insider knowledge. He does it through research and careful attention to the evidence. The game rewards his curiosity and punishes him for it simultaneously. He finds what he's looking for, and it kills him slowly. When he dies in the Round Table hold, slumped in his chair, it is one of the quieter deaths in the game. No dramatic battle, no final words. He simply is there one visit and gone the next, or reduced to an unresponsive body. The work killed him, and the work was incomplete. He got close. The people who can finish what he started are you and Rani has her own reasons for the knowledge. The Albinauric Wolfback Archer and the second generation. The second generation Albinaurics, who appear as ceramic sphere-like beings curled into themselves, were designed that way deliberately. The Albinauric woman who created the second generation was responding to the persecution of the first. She wanted to make people who could not be immediately identified as Albinauric, who could hide. She succeeded in a terrible way. The second generation can curl into spheres that look like stones or pottery. They can be overlooked or simply ignored in a world that tends to treat objects as more neutral than people. But the curling posture of the second generation Albinaurics is also fetal. They look like unborn creatures. There is a design choice there that reads as commentary. The second generation was made to be hidden, made smaller, made less visible. Their survival form is a retreat into the posture of the unborn. They did not evolve this trait, they were built with it, a people designed to survive by becoming invisible. Latena's questline, which ends in the second generation's community at the Halig Tree, brings a first generation Albinauric into contact with the refuge that the second generation has found. It is a reunion of a divided people, and Latena's final state, transformed by the encounter into something new, suggests that, even in the lands between tragedy, there are moments of arrival, of coming home, of rest earned. The Fell Twins and the Erd Tree's guardian monsters. The Fell Twins are a double boss fight found in a specific catacomb, and they represent a specific form of guardian entity connected to the Erd Tree's cycle. They are massive, silent, armed with ceremonial weapons, and they fight you together in a cramped space. They are not intelligent in the way human bosses are. They are more like automatons set to their task. The Erd Tree's management of the death cycle required enforcement. Not everyone enters the cycle willingly. The Erd Tree's guardians, including the Fell Twins and various other catacomb bosses, exist to ensure that those who should be in the cycle are in it. They are the literal mechanics of the afterlife made into enemy encounters. Fighting them is fighting the infrastructure of the system rather than any individual agent of it. This is one of the ways the game makes the Golden Order feel genuinely systemic rather than simply the product of individual villains. The structures that enforce the Order do not require conscious malice. They operate automatically. The Fell Twins were not ordered to specifically oppress anyone. They were set to maintain the cycle, and they maintain it without judgment, without understanding, without the capacity to consider whether the cycle deserves maintaining. Night Cavalry and the spectral processions. At night, in various locations across the lands between, the Night Cavalry appear. They are spectral knights on spectral horses, riding in formation, patrolling the roads they once patrolled in life. They are aggressive toward anything they encounter, but their aggression is the aggression of soldiers following orders from an authority that no longer exists. The Night Cavalry were a knightly order before the Shattering. They patrolled specific roads and regions, protecting or policing, depending on your perspective. After the Shattering, and presumably after their deaths, they continue. Their spirits are bound to their roots. They ride at night because that is when they rode in life. They are the persistence of duty without the person who held the duty. Encountering a night cavalry patrol for the first time, especially early in the game when you're relatively weak, creates a very specific feeling. The thunder of hooves in the dark, the spectral glow, the sense that you have walked into something that was not waiting for you specifically, but that will notice you now that you are here. It is not menace. It is worse than menace. It is procedure, applied regardless of circumstance, by something that cannot be reasoned with, because it is no longer capable of reason. The tibia mariner and the rivers of the dead. The tibia mariner is a skeletal figure that rows a spectral boat across dry land, carrying passengers and death route. It is one of the odder enemy types in the game, and its origin is not fully explained. The mariner is conducting something that resembles a funeral practice, a boat carrying the dead to wherever the dead go, except that it is on land, and the dead it carries are things that should not be moving, and the destination seems to be wherever death route is being taken. The boat imagery connects to ancient funeral traditions where a boat carried the dead across water to the afterlife. The tibia mariner is that tradition corrupted or simply displaced. In the Golden Order's world, the dead are supposed to go to the Erd tree. The mariner is taking them somewhere else, somewhere connected to Godwyn's influence, to the death route spreading through the world. Whether the mariner knows what it is doing, whether there is any consciousness in it, is not clear. It rows, it deposits death route, it calls skeletal enemies when you fight it. It does not speak. Like so many things in the lands between, it is performing a function that was set in motion by events it was not designed to handle. The death system is broken, and the mariner is one of the pieces moving in the wrong direction as a result. The stone platform graves and small lore. Throughout the lands between, in graveyards and on cliffs and in hidden corners, there are sites of small specific burial, individual graves, pots with grave candles, platforms where bodies were laid out. These are the funerary practices of the common people of the lands between, not the grand Erdtree burial that the Golden Order promises to its chosen, but the smaller, more personal acts of putting someone in the ground and marking where they went. The common people of the lands between appear in these grave sites more than in any other way. The large characters, the demigods, and the knights, and the sorcerers, they dominate the name locations and the item descriptions. The common people are the ones buried in unmarked graves, the ones whose individual stories are too small to record. They farmed the land in Limgrave before the soldiers came. They lived in the ruins you now explore. They made something of their lives in the gap between divine catastrophes, and then the next catastrophe came, and they were gone. The Erdtree burial promised them connection to something larger. Whether they got what was promised is the question their gravesites silently pose. The bones in the ground do not answer. The Erdtree keeps growing. The cycle continues. The worm face and the outer edges of the world. The worm face enemies, found in the Altus Plateau and the surrounding areas, are humans whose faces have been replaced by masses of worms. They spit rot and disease. They are horrifying in a way that feels different from the other enemy types because there is a lingering sense that these were once ordinary people and that something happened to them that was not quick. The worm face is the result of extended proximity to a specific kind of corruption. The worms that replace the face are not simply parasites. They are a transformation, one that the lore suggests is connected to the outer edges of the Erdtree's influence, where the tree's control over the life cycle becomes porous and other influences bleed in. The Altus Plateau is close to the Erdtree, but it is also elevated, exposed, and the area around it shows signs of multiple overlapping influences. What the wormface represents thematically is the cost of living too close to power without being chosen by it. The Golden Order's grace protects the chosen. The wormface is what happens to those in the power's sphere who are not chosen and who are not protected. Latena's wolf Lobo, Latenna's wolf companion Lobo, is named and remembered. Lobo carried Latenna because she could not walk. Lobo was her legs, her mobility, her freedom. The wolf died before the events of Latenna's questline, and his ashes are what you summon when you use Latenna as a spirit ash. She sits on his back, even in death. He carries her even in death. The detail of the dead wolf carrying the living woman, and then both of them as spirits still in the same configuration, the same relationship, is one of the small perfect details the game returns to over and over. The relationship between Latenna and Lobo was not dissolved by death. It persisted. Whatever they were to each other is still operative. Wolf companions appear several times in Elden Ring. Blade is half wolf. The wolves of Raya Lucaria are connected to the Carians. The Ludogare wolf enemy carries a distinct identity from other animal enemies. Wolves in the lands between carry an association with loyalty and with wildness, with something that lives outside civilization's categories. Latenna, an Albinoric, outside the Golden Order's grace, riding a wolf, also outside the Order's categories, is an image of those who found belonging with each other precisely because they had no place in the official world. The sealed tunnel and the land's hidden veins, the sealed tunnel in Altus Plateau leads down through the rock face via a hidden, illusory wall and descends through a cave system lit by the glow of stonite, the crystalline rock that stores magical power. It eventually leads to the divine tower of West Altus. The tunnel and its internal structure suggest a mining operation, the extraction of magical resources from the land itself. The lands between sits on enormous reserves of glintstone and other magical materials, and the institutions of power have been drawing on these for centuries. The Academy's sorcery, the Golden Order's incantations, all of it is ultimately powered by what comes out of the earth. The sealed nature of the tunnel, the illusory wall hiding its entrance, suggests that this particular mining operation was sensitive. Something down here needed to be kept quiet, either because of what was being extracted or because of who was doing the extracting. The enemies inside are not soldiers, but rather constructs and elemental guardians, set to protect something rather than to follow orders. Following this thread too far leads into speculation, but the sealed tunnels scattered across the lands. Between tell a consistent story, there is infrastructure beneath the surface that most people are not supposed to know about. The Golden Order maintained itself through resources and processes it kept hidden from the people living under it. What you see at ground level is the official story. What is underground is how it actually worked. Caelid's past and the tragedy of what was there before Caelid is so devastated now that it is easy to forget it was once something else. Before the Battle of Aeonia and before Radahn's campaign in that region, Caelid was farmland. It had towns. It had people. The ruins you navigate through the red haze were once buildings where people lived and worked and died of ordinary causes. The specific ruins in Caelid include churches that were once part of the Golden Order's religious network, towers that served as lookouts or signal stations, and the remains of a settlement pattern that suggests a functional agricultural region. Someone grew things here. Someone raised animals. The Erd tree's light reached Caelid just as it reached everywhere else, and its people were part of the same general civilization as Limgrave or Liurnia. What happened to Caelid is what happens when a conflict between two demigod-level forces is resolved by one of them releasing an outer god's power at full intensity. The land did not choose to be there. The people did not choose to be between Malenia and Radahn. They were simply in the place where the catastrophe happened. The dog enemies in Caelid are infected by the scarlet rot, and they are visibly more grotesque than dogs elsewhere in the game. The birds in Caelid are diseased. The plants that grow in Caelid are wrong, red and distorted. The rot does not only kill, it transforms. The entire ecosystem of the region has been rewritten by prolonged exposure to an outer god's influence. Caelid is what the lands between looks like when the greater will's management fails to contain a competing power. Radun's festival and the ethics of it. The Radun festival, which is the event you enter to fight Radun in Caelid, is worth examining carefully because its ethics are complicated. The festival is run by Castellan Geron, who organises warriors from across the lands between to come and fight Radun together. The framing is celebratory. A great warrior deserves a great battle. Come and fight Radun while he still has the strength to be a worthy opponent. But Radun is clearly suffering. The rot has destroyed his mind. He is no longer the person he was. The festival is a mass killing of something that was once great and is now diminished and agonized, and it is organized as a celebration. Geron and the participating warriors, including Alexander, frame it as an honor, a mercy, a way to give Radun a meaningful end. Is it? The question does not have a simple answer. Radun cannot consent. He is not capable of consent anymore, but he is also suffering, visibly and terribly, and there is no other mechanism available to end that suffering, while also completing the practical necessity of defeating him so that the stars can move again. The festival is doing something necessary in a way that makes it more palatable by calling it an honor rather than a mercy killing. The character who is most honest about the complexity of this is not a major NPC. It is the collective, emotional response of the NPCs, who knew Radun, who do not celebrate after his defeat. They are quiet. They fought him because they had to, or because they wanted to honor him. They do not feel good about it. The Bloodhound Knights. The Bloodhound Knights are a specific class of enemy encountered in several locations. Most notably, Stormvale and Farum Azula. They are described as knights who abandoned their lords and allegiances, eventually losing their human reason and becoming something between knight and beast. They fight on all fours. They are fast, unpredictable, and clearly operating on instinct rather than strategy. The Bloodhound Knight Darrowil, the one you fight in the Forlorn Hound Evergale, has item descriptions that tell his specific story. He abandoned his lord and committed acts of betrayal, and was sealed in an Evergale as punishment. The Evergale is a prison built from gravity magic, a perfect sphere of spatial confinement. Darrowil was put there, and has been there ever since, his mind deteriorating further with each year of imprisonment. Blade is involved in hunting Darrowil, which is one of the early connections you can make in his questline. Blade as a half-wolf, hunting a knight who has become beast-like, is a pairing that the game does not comment on directly. The mirror image of a man becoming more animal, and an animal trying to remain a man. The Evergales in general are worth spending time with. There are several across the lands between, each containing something that was deemed too dangerous to kill, but too dangerous to leave free. The game's prison system, from the Shunning Grounds to the Evergales, reflects an authority that dealt with its problems through containment rather than resolution. Lock it away. Seal it up. Do not deal with the underlying issue. Just make sure it cannot spread. The Margit encounters and their relationship to challenge Margit appears twice in the game, in a boss capacity, once at the entrance to Stormvale and once in a harder version in the Altus Plateau. He also appears as an overworld presence in several locations if you find his summoning signs, which allow you to summon him as an ally in certain boss fights. The same character who tried to kill you becomes, in a different context, fighting alongside you. This mechanical flexibility reflects something the game does consistently with its characters. Most enemies are not your enemies because of you specifically. Margit attacks you because you are a Tarnished seeking to become Elden Lord. He attacks any such Tarnished. His opposition to your goal is principled, from his perspective, not personal. In contexts where your goal and his interests align, he can fight beside you. The game does not have many characters who are simply evil. Even Margit, who is explicitly trying to prevent you from reaching your destination, has a reason. He has watched many Tarnished try and fail to become Elden Lord. He has seen what the pursuit of that goal does to people. He believes genuinely that stopping you is doing you a favor, that the Elden Ring is not something that should be restored by someone who does not fully understand what they're getting into. He is wrong, probably, or at least his method is wrong, but his concern is not entirely without basis. The tarnished who came before you and failed did not simply die. They became the hollow, mad creatures you encounter throughout the world. The road to the Elden Ring is littered with the remains of people who had the same goal you have and could not carry it. The Rune of Death's full implications. Let us return once more to the Rune of Death and follow its implications to the end. The Rune of Death is sealed within Malekith. This means that for as long as the lands between has been under the Golden Order, the concept of true permanent death has been kept under lock and key, maintained by a single guardian, carried in a blade, not allowed to spread. This means the lands between has been running for an enormous amount of time on a fundamentally broken version of death. People do not truly die. They return. The Erdtree recycles them. The cycle continues, but nothing about the cycle resolves anything. The same souls return, carry the same griefs, fight the same wars. The shattering happened partly because nothing could truly end. Godwyn could not rest. Fear could not complete her work. The demigods could kill each other, and it meant nothing permanent. When you kill Malekith and release the Rune of Death, you break this system open. The undying begin to truly die. The Erdtree's cycle is disrupted, and in the chaos of that moment, in the Ashen Capital, there is something like grief, but also something like relief. Things can end now. Things can be finished. The cost is high. Many people die who might otherwise have continued, but the possibility of conclusion has been returned to the world. This is the most radical thing the Tarnished does on the path to the Elden Ring. Not fighting the demigods, not burning the Erdtree, but killing the keeper of the Rune of Death and giving permanence back to death. Every ending that follows is built on that foundation. Whatever age you inaugurate, it is an age where things can truly end, for the first time in the history of the Golden Order. Hugh's oath. Hugh, the blacksmith in the Round Table Hold, is bound there against his will. He does not say this quietly, he states it. He is compelled to remain, unable to leave, and he does not know who or what compelled him. He has an oath he does not remember taking, or an oath that was placed on him, and it keeps him at the forge in the hold, regardless of what else happens. Hugh has one dream. He wants to forge a weapon capable of killing a god. Not a specific god, just a god. He tells you this as if it is a passing fancy, but it is clearly something that has occupied him for a long time. He cannot leave. He cannot pursue the dream himself. He can only make things for the people who come through and hope that one of them will accomplish what he cannot. When the Tarnished eventually faces and defeats the Elden Beast, which is the physical manifestation of the greater will, they are doing what Hugh dreamed of. The weapons Hugh forged and upgraded for you are, in a literal sense, the instruments of that god-killing. Hugh's oath kept him in the hold. His dream gave him a reason to keep working. And the Tarnished he served completed the work without either of them being able to call it that out loud. After certain events, Hugh disappears from the hold. Whether he is freed from his oath or simply consumed by what happens to the hold is not made clear. He was there for the work. The work is done. Whatever that means for him is left unanswered. The smithing masters and the lost craft traditions. Throughout the lands between, you can find smithing stones which are the materials needed to upgrade weapons. They come from mines and caves and ruins. The tradition of their use is ancient, predating the Golden Order and rooted in a craft culture that the Order incorporated into its military-industrial structure. The smithing masters, figures like E.G. at Three Sisters, represent the highest level of this craft, able to work with materials and techniques beyond what a common blacksmith can handle. Their knowledge is specialized and rare, and connected to specific lineages or schools of training. When these masters die or disappear, their specific knowledge goes with them. The game's upgrade system, taken as a lore object rather than a mechanical one, suggests a world with deep craft traditions that have been fragmenting over time. The best smiths are isolated, the best materials are hard to find, the knowledge of how to do the most sophisticated work is concentrated in fewer and fewer hands as the Shattering's chaos kills or disperses the people who had it. You are the beneficiary of whatever tradition managed to survive long enough for you to access it. The Volcano Manor and its architecture. Volcano Manor deserves attention for its design as a space, in addition to its lore. It is built in and around a volcanic structure, and there is something deliberately domestic about parts of it despite the deadly purpose it serves. There are dining rooms. There are bedrooms. There is a parlour where Tanith receives guests. It is organised like a manor house, like a noble estate, and the incongruity of that domesticity against the volcanic landscape and the assassination questlines creates a specific kind of dark humour. The manor's design suggests that Rykard or Tanith, or both, were interested in maintaining the forms of civilization, even while pursuing entirely uncivilized goals. The assassination targets you hunt are given to you as written letters, politely worded, delivered in envelopes. The murder is conducted with the formality of a household task. This is the aesthetics of gentility over the reality of violence, which is not an unusual combination in the history of powerful institutions. The Golden Order itself does something similar, using the beautiful architecture of the Erd tree to house a system of control and exclusion. The manor's residents, the varied characters who have found their way there, each have their own reason for being in this place that represents rebellion against the order. Some are ideologically committed, some are just hiding, some, like Patches, are there for commerce. The manor is a strange kind of asylum, open to those the Golden Order has no place for, and its hospitality is genuine, even if its activities are not benign. The dragon-burnt ruins and the beginning of the journey. The dragon-burnt ruins at the beginning of Limgrave are one of the first things you encounter after arriving in the lands between. They are named for the dragon that burned them, and the ruins they represent were clearly once a settlement of some size and function. Now they are rubble and rats, and a cave with a chest that transports you somewhere unintended if you open it. The burned ruins are the visual shorthand for the state of the lands between as a whole. This was once something. A fire came from above. What remains is the skeleton of the thing that was there, still visible in structure, but no longer functioning. The lands between is full of dragon-burnt ruins in the metaphorical sense. The shattering was the fire. What you explore is the skeleton of a civilization that was once coherent. The specific dragon that burned this particular settlement is not identified. It could have been a wild dragon, the kind that attack you in the open world. It could have been one of Godric's dragons, the ones who serve him after losing their remembrance to him. Or it could have been one of the many uncategorized acts of violence that accompanied the shattering. The ruins do not know. They are just ruins. Eleonora and the Volcano Manor assassinations. Eleonora, Violet Bloodyfinger, is one of the assassination targets you pursue as part of the Volcano Manor questline. She invades your world in the Second Church of Marika in Altus Plateau, attacking you with a dancer's blade and the Blood Flame Talons incantation. She is graceful and deadly, and clearly trained rather than maddened. Her lore, when you receive her item upon defeating her, suggests she was a member of the Volcano Manor's wider network, someone who served Rykard's agenda through direct violence. But there is more to her than her role. The dancing quality of her combat style, the elegance of it, suggests someone who treated killing as a form of expression, who found something in the practice of her work beyond mere effectiveness. Yura, the hunter who has been tracking her, is the NPC who sends you to face her. Yura is himself a complex figure, someone who hunts bloody fingers and off-worldly invasions, and who has a personal code that is not entirely explained. His pursuit of Eleonora is one thread of a larger story about the blood oath that connects the Volcano Manor's network to the formless mother's influence. The specific interaction of Eleonora's blood flame powers and Yura's clean hunter aesthetic suggests a conflict not just between two individuals, but between two different relationships to power. Yura uses his blade cleanly. Eleonora uses the formless mother's blood magic. Their conflict is the conflict between ordered violence and chaotic violence, between a person who has a code and a person who has an art. The Dung Eater's mask, the mask worn by the Dung Eater and distributed through certain questline outcomes, is called the Omen mask. It is the mask of a condemned creature. When you wear it, NPCs react differently to you, some with hostility and some with recognition. The mask is a statement. Wearing it says something about your relationship to the Golden Order and to the category of person the Order considers cursed. The Dung Eater's decision to wear the Omen mask is both practical and philosophical. Practically, it disguises his face. Philosophically, it announces his identification with the condemned. He is wearing his rejection of the Golden Order literally on his face. He is not hiding what he is or what he represents. He is putting it forward. The mask's distribution through his questline means that players who complete his story can choose to wear it. This is the game's quiet invitation to consider what it means to identify with the excluded rather than with the established order. Wearing the Omen mask does not make you the Dung Eater, but it makes you someone who is choosing to walk through the world marked with the symbol of those the world has decided to condemn. The Shattering's effect on ordinary knights, the ordinary soldiers and knights of the lands between, the ones who are not demigods or grand figures, are among the most quietly tragic presences in the game. They were given jobs, oaths, armours and weapons. They served institutions. And then the Shattering happened, and their institutions either collapsed or became armies in a war they did not choose. The Radan soldiers in Caelid are still fighting, not for any strategic objective, not because anyone is commanding them. They fight because they are soldiers of Radan, and that is what soldiers of Radan do. Their lord has lost his mind. Their region is devastated. They persist hollowed out, going through the motions of a military existence that no longer has a purpose. The Leyndell soldiers in the capital are similar. They patrol. They defend. The orders they are following were issued before the Shattering and have never been updated because the chain of command that would update them no longer functions. They are soldiers without a war, maintaining a garrison posture in a city that the war already passed through. This is one of the specific things the Lands Between does with military culture. The soldiers are not villains. They are also not heroes. They are workers who have been abandoned by the institutional structure that gave their work meaning, continuing anyway because stopping means admitting that the thing they served has already ended. Godfrey's warriors and the exiled tarnished. When Godfrey was exiled, his warriors went with him. These were the champions of the early Golden Order, the fighters who had helped establish Marika's dominance over the Lands Between. They were not common soldiers. They were the best of the best, and they were sent away because the best of the best no longer had enemies to fight. These exiled warriors became the tarnished. Over generations, they wandered outside the Lands Between, fighting among themselves and against whatever they encountered. They could not truly die because even in exile they retained some connection to the cycle of grace. They regenerated, they continued, and they grew harder and stranger for it, shaped by a life outside the protection of the Erd Tree. The specific figure of the tarnished as a wandering, deathless warrior who has become roughened by existence outside civilization maps, onto certain archetypes that appear throughout mythology. The exile who returns, the outcast who was always more capable than the homeland recognized. You are all of those tarnished descendants, or you're one of them who has been called back after a long absence. The exile is over. The lands between needs what it sent away. The Crucible's final word. There is a location in the mountaintops called the First Church of Marika. It is one of the oldest churches in the game, and it is remote and difficult to reach. Inside, you can find Marika's first tear, an item that restores HP and FP, and a Crucible talisman, which enhances the Crucible incantations. In the oldest church dedicated to Marika, in the most ancient and remote part of the map, the item that has survived is one dedicated to the Crucible. The thing Marika's order was built to suppress is present in the very first monument to Marika's power. Whether this is because the church predates the suppression of the Crucible, whether the talisman was placed there as a historical artifact, or whether someone specifically preserved it there as a statement, the game does not say. But the image is clear. The Crucible was there at the beginning. It survived the Golden Order's centuries of dominance. It survived the shattering. It persists in the oldest, most sacred places. It is older than what tried to replace it, and it will be there after the replacements are gone. Marika's own origin, her Numen heritage, her coming from outside the lands between, means she herself was once something the Crucible did not know. She came from elsewhere. She brought an outside power to bear on an ancient world. And the oldest monument to her power still holds, in its quiet corner, the relic of what was here before she arrived. Hyeta's journey to the Fingers Hyeta appears first as a young woman, sitting alone near the beginning of Liurnia, blind, guided by light, she somehow perceives at the edges of things. She asks for shabriri grapes, the eyes of frenzied flame adherents, to eat. She eats them and thanks you, and moves further along a path she cannot see. Following Hyeta through her questline means watching her move toward the frenzied flame, in stages each time you find her further along. Each time she has eaten another eye and felt the warmth more strongly. She's not being tricked. She knows what she is walking toward in some sense. She just experiences it differently than someone with sight might. The light she follows is the frenzied flame's warmth, and she is drawn to it not by manipulation, but by a genuine resonance with what it represents. When she reaches the three fingers and becomes a finger maiden of the frenzied flame, her contentment is real. The warmth she was following is the warmth she finds. She is complete in the way she is complete, and what she is now the vessel of is what will burn everything, and she knows this. And in the logic of the frenzied flame, the burning is the point. Hyeta's story is the most successful argument the game makes for the frenzied flame as something other than simple destruction. A person who was never whole in the ordered world, who was blind and wandering, found in the promise of undifferentiated unity something that felt like home. The cost of what she has chosen is everything, but the thing she gains, in her experience of it, is warmth and belonging and the end of separation. For someone who is already separated from the world by her blindness, this trade might have made sense in a way that is difficult to argue with from the outside. The formless mother. The formless mother is one of the least explained outer gods in the game. She communicates with Moog through visions and grants him blood-related powers. Her influence visible in the rivers of blood flame that flow through Mogwin Palace. What she is, what she wants, and why she has fixed on the lands between as a site of interest are questions the game does not answer. The formless aspect of her name suggests she does not have a defined form, that she is something diffuse, something that exists in blood itself rather than in any body or vessel. Blood is everywhere. Blood is in every living thing. An outer god that operates through blood has the widest possible distribution of any force in the world. Everything with a circulatory system is already part of her medium. Her interest in Miquella, as channeled through Morg, is one of the more disturbing implications. If the formless mother operates through blood, and Miquella is a being of unusual divine blood, then the formless mother's involvement with Morg's plan might not be incidental. She may be using Morg to get to Miquella, to access a quality of blood that would give her influence unprecedented power in the lands between. Morg thinks he's using the Formless Mother. The lore suggests the arrangement might work the other way. The Serpent Hunter and the weapon against gods. The Serpent Hunter is a unique weapon found in Volcano Manor, specifically in the chamber where you fight Rykard. It is the only weapon effective against Rykard's serpent form, dealing massive damage that regular weapons cannot match. Its lore says it was made specifically to hunt the god-devouring serpent, which means someone anticipated the god-devouring serpent being a problem that needed to be solved. Someone made the Serpent Hunter before Rykard merged with the serpent. This weapon was prepared in advance. By whom? The lore does not specify, but its presence in the manor, its availability to you at exactly the moment you need it, suggests either extraordinary foresight on someone's part or deliberate placement by a party who wanted Rykard to be vulnerable when the right warrior arrived. The Serpent Hunter, as an object, is another piece of the game's suggestion that the events of the game did not happen by accident. Pieces were positioned, weapons were placed, paths were laid. Whether this is the Greater Will's management, Marika's planning, or the accumulated luck of an ancient world that has had everything happen many times before, the Tarnished journey keeps encountering things that were waiting for them. The age before age. There is a concept in certain item descriptions that refers to something before the age of the Erd Tree, before the age of dragons, something that the game suggests is so old that the languages and frameworks of the current world cannot properly describe it. The Elden Star's incantation points toward this. The Crucible incantations point toward it. The ancient dragons of Farum Azula, who have been there since before the current age, remember something of it. This oldest layer of history is the least accessible in the game. The fragments you find are fragments of fragments, descriptions of things that were described by people who were describing something they barely understood. The primordial before the Crucible. The state of the world before life, as the lands between understands it, existed. This layer of history is the one that the game most consistently refuses to explain. It seems designed to be beyond the reach of the current age's comprehension. Whatever was there at the very beginning, whatever shaped the conditions that allowed the Crucible to form and the world to develop as it did, is something the game gestures toward without touching directly. It is the deep mystery beneath the deep mystery, and in a game full of unanswered questions, this one is the most deliberately placed. The final shape of things. By the time you have walked through all of it, the lore of Elden Ring does not resolve into a single clean narrative. It resolves into a texture, a feeling, a sense of a world that has been living for an enormous amount of time, making choices and suffering consequences and producing people who are trying their best under impossible conditions and mostly failing, but sometimes, in small and specific ways, succeeding. Godwyn could not be saved, but fear found a way to give him something close to rest. Renala could not keep Radagon, but she kept the academy, and she kept the students who loved her. Morgott could not save the capital, but he held it for as long as he could with everything he had. Malenia could not cure herself, but she kept fighting, and she kept herself. Miquella could not stay himself. But what he became completed something he had been working toward for a very long time, at a cost none of us can fully assess. The lands between is a tragic world. That is not in question. But it is also a world where tragedy is not the only thing, where people form attachments, where a wolf carries someone who cannot walk, where a turtle in a pope hat answers questions patiently and stays at his post when everything burns, where a man sells shrimp from a moat and tries to live simply, where an iron pot walks to every great battle because fighting is what he loves and life is short and the battles are beautiful.